Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
What are we, about a mile and a half away from where this ludicrous big balloon is currently floating above Parliament Square in London and distracting attention, I fear, from the man who is being lampooned by said balloon. A man who, well, yesterday, if there was ever any doubt left in the minds of ordinary, decent people, he yesterday proved that he is incapable, really, of opening his mouth without lying through his teeth. That's just a given now. That's just a fact. Even in this Sun interview, this remarkable Sun interview, there's a line that goes unchallenged. I was cutting a ribbon for the opening of Turnberry the day before the Brexit vote. I said Brexit will happen. He was photographed cutting the ribbon at Turnberry the day after Brexit happened, literally 48 hours later. He cannot tell the truth. He's incapable of lying. But I still don't understand why so many people don't care. And if you are one of them, would you take a moment out of your morning to tell me why you don't care about all the lies? Because they are almost endless. I think the New York Times has been keeping count, and they're over 3,000 now. I need to double-check that, lest I fall into the fake news trap myself. But things that are, you know, you can prove it beyond reasonable doubt. You can prove it beyond any refutation that they are lies, and it sort of corrupts everything. It's not down to Donald Trump. The media doesn't know how to cope with this, because we discovered something remarkable yesterday. I don't know if you were listening. I didn't appreciate at the time quite what a rumpus it was going to make, but entirely by accident, because the timings were thrown up in the air. We happened to be on air when he started giving his press conference in Brussels yesterday after the NATO meeting, and because we were live on air and I've got a microphone in the studio, and I get a bit bored listening sometimes to those sort of things. I didn't get bored listening to that one. I started chipping in, and all I started doing was pointing out when he said things that weren't true, when he said things that were simply lies. Although lie isn't even quite the right word, because he obviously believes it. He'd been saying now for a couple of weeks that he won Wisconsin and Ronald Reagan didn't. Ronald Reagan won it twice. One of the Bushes also won it. I mean, it's lie isn't quite the right word, is it? Because I think he believes it when he says it. So lying about that, lying about North Korea, lying about being at Turnberry the day before the Brexit vote, when in fact it was the day after the Brexit vote. Why don't people mind that he lies so much? 0345 6060 973. I also need to just clear a few things up for people who have been stranded in the shallow end of right-wing media. You might be very confused about the conflicting responses to two American presidents. For example, if you've heard it argued this week that you have to respect the office even if you don't respect the person who holds the office, obviously this school of thought refers only to a balloon mocking a man who puts babies on trial and tells barefaced lies every time he opens his mouth. That's the kind of person whose office you have to respect. Barefaced liars who put babies on trial and stand accused of multiple sexual assaults, they, by contrast, are completely free to disrespect the office of the British Prime Minister and the Mayor of London, whoever holds those offices. So when you've heard people this week say you have to respect the office, that they didn't mean the British Prime Minister or the Mayor of London. They meant the man who can't open his mouth without lying, who stands accused of multiple sexual assaults and who puts unaccompanied babies on trial. So just to clear that up. Also, if we go back 18 months, you may remember the idea that American presidents have no business interfering in British politics. You remember that? When Barack Obama was invited by David Cameron to comment on Brexit. So when a British Prime Minister invited an American president to comment on British politics, that was absolutely outrageous, unacceptable, and wrong. You remember all the newspaper articles about that. Well, to clarify this, the idea that American presidents have no business interfering in British politics, obviously this only refers to black presidents who are being honest at the invitation of a British Prime Minister. okay? When you have an orange president who is being dishonest and insulting a British Prime Minister, then obviously that president is free to say whatever they want and heap abuse on whichever elected British officials they please. So again, you could be forgiven for getting confused by the people who said that Barack Obama should have stayed stumm on the issue of Brexit, despite being asked by the British Prime Minister to comment on it. You have to remember that black presidents telling the truth, they have to obey one set of rules. Orange presidents telling lies, they don't. That is how it works. And then finally, Sadiq Khan is doing an appalling job. This is something else that is now absolutely uncontained within the right-wing media. None of them, however, will explain why there's not a Conservative MP in the country who wants to stand against him. So you get yesterday very much the sense, or this morning when you see this interview, very much the sense that Trump yet again is just channeling the sort of Daily Mail comment section or the sort of vile rhetoric of your Breitbarts and your similar far-right news sites. And it works because all of these lines that he's used, that they are the lines that radio phone-in hosts have been hearing for years. Oh, it's wrecking our culture. It's undermining our culture. There's too much immigration. Where do you live? I live in a small village in Dorset. Where exactly are you getting your information from about these issues? How has your culture been eroded? None of those lines ever mean anything. All they mean is I don't like foreigners. Okay, because the next line you'll hear from the people saying, yeah, they're wrecking our culture, is, I don't really mind, James, but they don't integrate. To which you reply by saying, well, how integrated would you have to be to get elected mayor of the country's capital city? I mean, if you look, how do you define integration? Here's a fellow, got himself elected mayor of London's capital city, but Donald Trump's slagging him off as well and trying to blame him for both terrorism and crime. So it's almost as if when a Muslim gets as integrated as it's possible for a British Muslim to be, I suppose there's one stage higher, isn't there? It could be Prime Minister. So when a Muslim gets as integrated into British society as it is possible for a British Muslim to be, then he's actually the reason why we have terrorism and crime. So when you say you want them to be integrated, you're lying, aren't you? And again, the fans know that Donald Trump is lying, but they love the red meat that he gives them because he allows them to blame their whole lives on brown people. And when I say those words, I say them with a very heavy heart. I mean, my life at the moment, professionally speaking, is kind of like the 21st century equivalent of being Cassandra from ancient Greece, the prophetess whose curse was to be right about everything but believed about nothing. I mean, this is now utterly conclusive and irrefutable proof that Donald Trump is a white supremacist rabble-rouser. I mean, they've got to integrate. Well, he's mayor of London. Oh, yeah, he's responsible for terrorism and crime. And I would love to hear an explanation of why people don't mind the lies that doesn't just portray them as racist, because it is so depressing, really, to be led to that conclusion, and you genuinely and sincerely hope that you are wrong. Because I hate being lied to. Oddly, one of the curses of liberal politics and compassionate worldviews is that you actually hate being lied to more by people who are supposed to be on your side of history than you do by the people who you know are liars. This is the real difference between the two divisions at the moment, is that the people on the Donald Trump side of history, the people who like to see others being abused, who like to see children in cages, who like to hear about women being sexually assaulted in a boastful environment, those kind of people, they have to believe that the rest of us are secretly like them. I guess it's the only way they can kind of sleep at night. They have to believe that there's nothing wrong with them and that everybody who condemns this sort of behaviour secretly is the same. So secretly, all liberals are, perfectly comfortable with sex assaults or the caging of children or sundry other cruelties and abuses. Secretly, all people on the other side must be the same as me because I can't be as horrible as they're saying. This must be normal. Right? And then, of course, if you are not horrible, if you do hate lies, and someone on your team, so to speak, turns out to have been a wrong and ought to have done something wrong, it's double pain. Not no pain. It's not like, ha, so we're only as bad as you are. It's double pain. And that, again, is part of the problem that the media has, that journalism has. So, two questions, really. Why don't people mind being lied to more? 0345 6060 And yesterday, very, very baby steps, I felt that we stumbled by accident upon part of the problem with journalism. Because by doing a live commentary on Donald Trump's speeches and his answers to those questions, we were actually able, in a purely improvised fashion, to point out the lies as they emerged from his mouth. And it was pretty much a constant stream. And if you don't like me or my position on issues such as this, Brexit, for example, then you probably should refer to Andrew Neil, who ordinarily, for reasons I don't fully understand, because he's scrupulously impartial, he is ordinarily perceived as somebody who speaks sometimes for the Brexit supporting contingency. Certainly the magazine that he's chairman of the publishing company does. He said last night that not a single word of truth, not a single fact came out of Donald Trump's mouth. So you have, there are two British journalists of rather different outlook, both arriving at the same conclusion. The man just lies. He lies and lies and lies and lies. And I, until relatively recently, thought that was a deal breaker. I thought when you got caught lying, the British public fell out of love with you. They can sustain a degree of deceit. They will put up with a certain amount of being gulled. The observation that all politicians fib, all politicians are liars. And there is guilt on all sides of politics for this. For me, there was a story of a Labour cabinet minister under Tony Blair who knew he would be asked on the Today programme if he'd read a report that morning. So he got his aide to read it to him in the back of the car, which meant that he could, in good conscience, state on air that he hadn't read the report, even though it had been read to him. So that kind of finagling and ducking and diving has led us to a place, I suspect, where a barefaced lie goes unchecked. But two questions. Why, yeah, all right, I'll put it like this. Why do people like being lied to? 0345 6060 And what would you do if you were in charge of the media? Because Rupert Murdoch obviously wants Britain to chop off both its legs and then beg America for crutches. That suits him both commercially and personally. Donald Trump is quite happy to go along with that because he'll sell the crutches at a massive markup. And Rupert Murdoch organised this interview with The Sun. I know why he's doing it. He loves to see the British public being lied to. He's made billions of pounds out of telling lies to the British public. But now that the British public has no choice, I mean genuinely no choice, but to see the scale of the deceit, he even lies about the election he won after it's been pointed out to him. He lies about predicting Brexit, despite being photographed 2 days after he said he made his prediction. The lies are absolutely out of control now. And I worry that I don't know how you get the genie back in the bottle. I don't know what happens next. And on one level, it's fascinating, but this is our life. These are our lives. This is our country. Our sovereign institutions are being utterly, utterly trashed by a man who cannot tell the truth. And some corners of the British media are not scared yet. And I don't mean the ones owned by the billionaires who will benefit from it necessarily. I mean the ones that I presumed were occupied by decent, honest people, albeit people I might disagree with about things. I thought everybody would agree that when the President of America starts abusing our elected officials, trashing our country and threatening our future, that's when we all pull together and say, off you trot, mate, or in the case of this rather funny balloon, off you float. We concern ourselves today chiefly with two questions. Why don't people get more bothered by being lied to when it becomes impossible to deny that you've been lied to? Why do so many admirers of Donald Trump on both sides of the Atlantic remain unconcerned? And secondly, how does the media now address the fact that the leader of the free world, the most powerful man on the planet, lies and lies and lies again? Because the way it gets reported is Trump says, not Trump lies. I want your help in unpicking that. Before all of that, though, one man very close to the centre of all these stories is the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who joins me on the line now. Mayor Khan, what precisely do you think Donald Trump has accused you of this morning?
Good morning, James. I mean, I woke up this morning to read the Sun newspaper, and I think the two central points President Trump says in relation to myself as the Mayor of London are my blame / responsibility for the terror attacks in London And secondly, my responsibility for the rise in immigration to Europe and the link that has with crime in London. And so those are the two things that I took away from the interview he gave to The Sun today.
So immigration from outside the European Union into the European Union is your fault?
Yeah, quite. Okay, can I deal with both those points,
yeah,
if that's okay? So firstly, last year we spoke about this. We suffered horrific terrorist attacks in our city. 14 people lost their lives, and they're still in our thoughts and prayers. But one of the comforting things in the days afterwards was the love, the support and solidarity we received from around the world, including from America and Americans. But you know what? In Manchester, 22 people died. In Berlin, 12. In Nice, 84 at the hands of terrorists. In Brussels, 32. In Paris, 130. And this is an evil we're all grappling with. And the question for President Trump, which I'm unclear of, is why he's singling me out as the mayor of London and not other mayors or other leaders of other countries. And your point about immigration is this. Look, crime has gone up in London. It's gone up over the last year by violent crime by 4%. In England and Wales, violent crime has gone up by 21%. In South Yorkshire and Manchester, it's gone up by 61 and 60%. And I've seen no evidence of immigration from Europe being the reason for that. But secondly, I'm not responsible for immigration to London, let alone to the UK or to Europe. And again, why criticise the mayor of London for immigration to our continent? And by the way, I disagree with that substantive point he makes on that, and not the EU27, Prime Minister May, Boris Johnson, and on and on and on.
You're being a little disingenuous. You must surely have at least a theory as to why Donald Trump would seek to blame a Muslim mayor of London for Islamist terror attacks, but not, for example, to dream of trying to blame Ken Livingstone for the July the 7th terror attacks. It hinges surely upon a rather obvious difference in background between you and Ken Livingstone, but you seem a little bit reluctant to say so out loud.
Well, I think that's a question that should be posed to President Trump and his allies. And by the way, can I say this, James, and Londoners need to know this, I also reached out to mayors in USA from Orlando to New York and other cities, Boston, where they suffered attacks as well. And that's what, we do. What's one of the things that we share in common with US and other cities around the world and other countries around the world is our determination to unite to defeat terrorism. And that's a question, all those allies you mentioned of President Trump is a question for them to answer with respect. It's not for me to explain the motivations of President Trump or what's in his mind when he says what he says.
No, but if someone's swinging at you, it's perfectly natural to wonder why.
Well, my concern is not about me. Mine's a bigger point. And I made this point in relation to the retweet President Trump did of Britain First. He retweeted 2 tweets sent by Britain First, an extreme far-right group banned from Facebook, the leader and deputy leader banned from Twitter, which amplified a message of division and hate. And one of the concerns that I have is the legitimization or normalization of views and prejudices that used to be the purview of the far right, and they're seized upon by the far right, and it empowers the far right. And that's why those of us who are progressives should call out. And I suspect there are Londoners today and people from around the country who'll be coming to London today to protest against not just President Trump, but his views and his policies, who, feel quite upset that our closest ally, their leader, has these views. And by the way, over the last few days, I've spoken to many Londoners, and they call themselves Londoners, by the way, who are Americans, who'll be protesting today as well against their president.
Do you wish you could burst that balloon?
No, let me see why. And this is a really important point which gets lost in the sort of hurt feelings of President Trump in relation to the balloon. Look, one of the things that the ambassador from the USA said 2 days ago, which was fascinating, and I agree with him 100%, is Ambassador Johnson said, uniquely, the US and the UK have this freedom of speech. And he was implying that actually he had no problems with protest and how we protest. And it's really important that we don't allow my personal views about a protest to colour whether permission is granted. So, for example, today there are protests taking place against President Trump, and they take many different forms: blimp balloons, banners, pots and pans, etc. But tomorrow in our city, there'll be a protest demonstration march from the extreme far right and pro-Trump supporters. Now, you can imagine what my views are in relation to those groups, but the idea that the Mayor of London would stop those protests taking place simply because I'm offended by some of their views, I think is wrong. And as long as it's peaceful, as long as it's safe, as long as the police are happy, I think we should celebrate the fact that we can agree to disagree, and I think that's a strength.
Did it cross your desk? Was there a moment when you could have run a line through it, through the application?
No. Well, yes and no. The way it works is it's officers in the GLA who make the decision. But I support the decision, by the way. I stand by our officers that work incredibly hard, and they use an objective criteria to decide whether permission is granted. They have two criteria, basically. Is it safe? Is it peaceful? Then it goes to the Met Police Service and the National Air Traffic Services, because obviously it's going to be in the air. We've got to make sure it's not a danger to, those involved in aviation and stuff. And so there are processes in place, and I've got to put aside my own views. I can't be the censor here.
Have you ever, have similar applications ever been turned down? Is there anything comparable that hasn't received permission?
My understanding is no balloons or blimps, but there have been many occasions where protests have either had conditions imposed upon them, and by the way, some of the protests this weekend, today and tomorrow, have some conditions imposed upon them by the police, and that's to do with not with the merits or demerits of the substance behind the protest, but is it safe, is it peaceful, is it going to be incitement, public disorder, those sorts of issues, and those decisions the police take on a routine basis. And by the way, one of the things about London is not simply do we have protests, we have major visitors, we have sporting events, we have concerts, and so the police have the expertise to make these sorts of decisions on a regular basis.
And finally, on the question of knife crime, and I accept that your answer would involve ordinarily pointing out that other parts of the country have similar problems and the cuts imposed upon the Met by central government. So we'll take those two answers as a given. It was suggested this morning on the breakfast show that you could tap into Metropolitan Police reserves as a sort of short-term way to address some of the problems that the police service is currently having in London. Why haven't you done that?
So our general reserves are roughly speaking 2%, which is the recommendation of any organisation to have 2% general reserves. Our earmarked reserves are roughly speaking 6%, and they've gone down from 14%. And earmarked reserves are for things that are earmarked to buy. So, for example, we've got to transform our IT, we've got to transform some of the fabric of the buildings, buy equipment, tasers, guns, etc. So they're earmarked for things. So it's not true to suggest that we've got millions of pounds sitting in a bank account accruing interest. We are spending what we've got. And by the way, this year and last year, we've invested from City Hall £140 million in 2 years. In the previous 8 years, City Hall didn't invest those sorts of money. They invested, roughly speaking, net £24 million. And so I'm using all the levers at my disposal to invest in our police. But you're right, the context is they've deducted £720 million over the last 7-8 years. I'm putting back £140 million. Over the next 3 years, by the way, I've got to find £320 million worth of more savings because of cuts that are planned for the next 3 years from central government.
Did you see Michael Fabricant's retweet about you?
I've not seen it, but I was told about it today.
For the benefit of my listeners, it's a kind of mocked-up image of a balloon in which Sadiq Khan is being mounted by a pig.
I mean, Michael Fabricant is an MP who was an MP when I was an MP, and he's never expressed views to me that I would find objectionable, and I'm surprised.
Is that as far as you're going to go? Surprised?
Well, I would expect a member of a mainstream party who's a member of Parliament to have tweeted what he appears to have tweeted. I've not seen the tweets. That's a disclaimer for his party to take action against him. I would certainly, if it was a member of my party having those views, I'd take it up with the leadership. In the past, by the way, when there's been allegations of anti-Semitism in my party from members, I've raised those with my party and spoken out against them. So, I've been consistent here, and the allegations made against the Conservative Party, not just during my campaign, but since then from senior people, including former chairs of that party, the Conservative Forum for Muslims, the Muslim Council of Britain, mainstream newspapers, and, I've got confidence, I say, holding my breath, that the Conservative Party will take the relevant action against Michael Fabricant.
Mayor Sadiq Khan, many thanks indeed. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time is 10:31. The questions are quite simple, although not necessarily easy to answer. The lies that we saw yesterday, because it happened live, because we were on air, because we spent so much time together now, you and me, it was the best and the most irresistible opportunity yet to conclude that the man, Donald Trump, cannot help himself. He doesn't know what's true and what isn't. He will say whatever he thinks will cast him in the best light in that specific moment. So he lies about his own election results. He lies about the summit in North Korea. He lies about predicting Brexit in the interview with The Sun today. He lies about absolutely everything. Over 3,000 lies, counted and detailed by the American media since he became president. Why don't people mind? It's stuff to talk about at the moment. Looking at that that tweet that Michael Fabricant put out, you just realise how debased the public discourse has become. And one of the reasons how it has become so debased is because the lies go unchecked. And I mean, compared to Brexit weren't lies in the conventional sense. Brexit were lots and lots of conflicting things that couldn't all be true together. Some of them were exaggerations and embellishments. Some of them were manipulations. But the con was built upon the idea that people who thought that they'd get X and people who thought that they'd get Y both ended up voting for Z. But this is different. Trump just lies and lies and lies again. And I want to know either why you don't mind or why you think other people don't mind. 0345 606 0973. And while we're at it, actually, having spoken to Sadiq Khan, we can theorise on the question of why anybody would suggest that Sadiq Khan might be responsible for terrorism in London, but nobody would ever dream of suggesting, for example, that the then Mayor Ken Livingstone was responsible for the July the 7th terror attacks on this city. Has anyone got an answer to that question? What could it possibly be that compels someone like Donald Trump to suggest that Sadiq Khan bears responsibility for Islamist terror attacks? I presume he only means the Islamist ones. He wouldn't presumably hold Sadiq Khan responsible for the attack upon the Finsbury Park Mosque. I don't know. I'll check if I get an interview with him. I really would see pigs flying. And then the question becomes, how could anybody suggest that? But we would all, I think, recognise that suggesting Ken Livingstone might somehow have borne responsibility for the July the 7th terror attacks, we'd laugh that out of town immediately. Sadiq Khan a little reluctant to answer that question, to speculate on what it might be. I hope my listeners are less reluctant to find out. Robert is in Cork, in Ireland. Hello, Robert. What would you like to say?
Good morning. Thanks for taking the call. So I'm a researcher at UCC. I'm a psychologist, and I think your question about why don't the lies matter is very much to the point. It's not that the lies don't matter. It's that followers of authoritarian personality types love them. Because it's a sign of power. If you can bend reality to your will, if you can make other people go along with what you're saying, it's like cruelty. It's like the worship of cruelty. What cruelty symbolises is that you have power, and being able to lie and get away with it is a similar kind of symbol. So it's not a question of...
Oh gosh, so it doesn't. It's not just something that becomes tolerated. It's something that's actively enjoyed.
Absolutely.
Oh
yes,
my days.
Actively enjoyed.
So when I sit here getting my liberal knickers in a twist about the fact that he is lying through his teeth, the people on the other side of the fence, and by no means all...
And they enjoy your knickers being in a twist, yes. Both of those things are very much to their pleasure.
Because the truth doesn't matter to them at all.
No, it's only power that matters. They're worshippers of power. Did you read that Sun interview or listen to that Sun interview where the guy is openly saying, this is like a Chinese emperor's court. It's overwhelming. I mean, and there are people...
No one is allowed to stand up to him. No one is allowed to criticise him. Nobody is allowed to correct him.
Absolutely. And there are some people who worship, they fetishise that. They go beyond just...
Well, why won't they admit it? At what point, and I hesitate to ask this question, also Brian Klaas, the LSE academic's very strong on this issue. I mean, I sort of wonder what happens next, because Steve Bannon is already suggesting that people should wear their racism as a badge of honour. That seems to be the next stage. But at what point do people start saying, I love the lies. I love the lies because he's so strong, he's a silverback gorilla, he can get away with lying and there's nothing the Liberals can do. When do they start being honest about that?
History doesn't have very kind lessons for when people wise up to this, I'm afraid. That's why we have systems in democracy. That's why we have limiting systems and division of powers, to stop this element of human character taking over.
It's also why we have international rules-based systems, in case any individual democracy falls foul of a potential despot.
Yeah, and we're all getting an opportunity to see who some of the people that you can fool all of the time are. You know, we now know them on a personal level. We didn't before, and now we do, and it should make us more sanguine, I think, in the future.
Well, sanguine is one word. Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be returning to the island of Ireland later in the programme because, as with all of the shenanigans unfolding here, perhaps inevitably, attention has been distracted from some very troubling developments in the north of Ireland. There are kind of some suggestions of returns to the province's darkest days, particularly in Derry. So we'll be catching up with that later in the programme. 10:41 is the time. Is Robert right? I mean, he might be an expert in psychology, but you know the mantra of our zeitgeist is that we've had enough of experts. So why don't people mind being lied to? Answer, they don't just not mind, they love it because it proves how powerful Trump is. And if you live your life in fear, if you're cowed and inadequate, the attraction of the authoritarian is irresistible. This is someone who will come along and make things better for you. He'll look after you. You don't really want to think too deeply about whether he will or not. Look, he's blaming everything on immigrants and Muslims. That's fantastic. That means my life is not my fault. And that is perhaps the appeal. And then when he proves that he can lie, he can break all the rules that the pussyfooting liberals live by, like truth, and decency. He can break all of those, and I actually like that too. I guess the problem is anyone going to ring me up and say they love the fact that Donald Trump can lie through his teeth? Because the next question then becomes, well, how can you believe the bits you like to believe? If you love the fact that he's lying about X, Y, and Z, how can you trust him to be telling the truth about A, B, and C? Because I can categorically tell you that he isn't telling the truth about anything. Jack's in Kingston. Jack, what would you like to say?
I just not really about the lies, but what I want to.
Well, that is kind of what I want to talk about, if you don't mind.
Well, I'll talk about. Okay, so what Donald Trump has said is that Sadiq Khan has not taken control of terrorism in London, but also crime in London. And that's what a big thing that he seems to just be ignoring in all of his responses this morning on all of his media appearances. Sadiq is ignoring the fact that Donald Trump has said, do something about crime in London, do something about terrorism in London.
Why, if you've chosen to go down this path rather than talk to me about why people like being lied to, what's the difference, do you think, between Sadiq Khan and recent terrorism and Ken Livingstone and the July the 7th terror attacks, the biggest terror attack?
There's no difference.
So why would nobody ever suggest that Ken Livingstone was responsible for July the 7th?
Because because Donald Trump wasn't in power, maybe...
No, I didn't say Donald Trump. I said anybody. Nobody would ever dream of suggesting that Ken Livingstone was responsible for the July the 7th terror attacks. I'm frankly staggered anyone would suggest that Sadiq Khan bears responsibility for more recent terror attacks. So what's the difference?
No one's blaming him for the acts of terrorism. What they're blaming him for is his control of what in London.
So he runs the CTU now in the Home Office, does he?
He's not got any control of police. When people are scared...
No, but he doesn't run the Home Office or the counter-terrorism unit. So you've chosen not to talk about Donald Trump's lies, but instead you're now sharing one of the lies, that Sadiq Khan has a responsibility, according to Donald Trump, for both immigration policy and counter-terrorism. We know that he doesn't. So why do you want to believe that he does? What is it you get out of believing this particular lie, Jack?
So I don't support Donald Trump. But what
I didn't say you did, but you've chosen to believe this lie, and I want to know what you get in return.
I've chosen to believe what he said about crime in London and terrorism in London.
Yes, but we've established that Sadiq Khan's not responsible for counter-terrorism policies, and he doesn't run the Home Office. So Donald Trump has invited you to come down on Sadiq Khan for terrorism in a way that nobody would have dreamed of doing with Ken Livingstone after the July the 7th terror attacks. We both know what the answer to this question is. I've just got 20 seconds left to find out whether you've got the guts to say it out loud. What do you think the difference is between Ken Livingstone's relationship with terror attacks on London and Sadiq Khan's, through the eyes of someone like Donald Trump or indeed you?
The difference is Donald Trump wasn't in power, so he wouldn't have said anything. He probably would have said the same thing. I reckon he would have said the same thing.
OK.
You could try and...
Of course you do, Jack.
Whatever you want to do.
Watch that nose, mate. You're going to have your eye out in a minute. Of course Donald Trump would have come... Of course he'd have come to London and said, I blame Ken Livingstone for terrorism. 10:45 is the time. So little time, so many mysteries. Why wouldn't anybody accuse Ken Livingstone? I mean, no one would dream of doing this, right? Of somehow bearing responsibility for the July the 7th terror attack. So what is it about Sadiq Khan that prompts Donald Trump to try to finger him for terror attacks in London recently? Not the far-right terror attacks, obviously. I don't think Donald Trump's trying to blame him for those. It's just the Islamist ones. So it's a mystery, that. I wonder if anyone can unravel it. We're also looking at why it is people like being lied to, a very troubling answer from a University College Cork academic on that. Very, very troubling, actually. And what does media have to do now? How do journalisms address these crises in public trust? You have one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful man on the planet, lying. You have an analysis of his support that says they love the lies. They don't care. They love the lies. And then you have the rest of the world going, well, what do we do? How do you address this? I think we knocked on the door of an answer yesterday when we started live fact-checking that press conference. But, God, I've only got 1 million listeners. It's not really going to make a dent in the overall picture. And then, of course, we have that curious case of Michael Fabricant, the Conservative MP, tweeting a profoundly vile image of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, which was both, I think, a sort of incitement to religious hatred as well as having deeply racist connotations. In response to the balloon, which I asked the Mayor if he had any regrets about not censoring, whether or not he wished he could burst it, and he was pretty adamant that well, two things I took away from that. Number one, it followed a due process, so while he could have nixed it in that process, it went through all the usual channels that applications such as that do. So if you're thinking of doing one of Sadiq Khan himself or Jean-Claude Juncker or whoever it may be, then crack on. I mean, that's the path it goes down. But then again, he also said, if we start making political decisions based on the fear of offending foreign politicians, where indeed will it lead? Well, it leads us to Parliament Square, which is where Rachel Venables is at the moment. And how big is it, Rachel? I mean, I know you're going to say 6 metres, but you know what I mean. In the context of, oh, James, it's as big as a...
I was actually going to say 20 foot.
Right. That only helps. So now I'm thinking 3 and a bit of me.
Yeah, well, earlier, so when it was on its back earlier and they sort of hauled it out and lay it out on the tarpaulin on its back and they rolled it out and they started to blow it up, by the time the belly was full in the air, it was about the size of 2 men. Okay. So you'd have sort of all the people gathered around and I was sort of stood back a little bit and all you could see was just this giant white mound. You could just about make up the little safety pin that they've cleverly put on the design, and then if you turned around the other side, just the giant sort of hairy orange chest was facing you. It's a lovely image I'm painting here, I'm sure. But no, it is massive, and I'd say it's about 50 foot in the air as well, just gently floating, ambling away. It's facing Parliament, it's sort of gurning down on the traffic as it goes past, and it's generated an absolutely huge following. Hundreds of people have turned up here this morning, some of them with placards planned. They've got masks, they've brought sort of demonstrations, ugly, many of them of Trump of their own, and obviously no doubt they're going to be taking part in some of the protests later. Others are just Londoners, tourists, people here with selfie sticks and their phones who just on their way past stopped and wanted to take a look and take a picture. So it's certainly generating a bit of a stir, and it's here until 11:30, so it's got another 40 minutes or so left. Just 2 hours it was allowed to fly here over Parliament Square.
I mean, crikey, what an awful lot of fuss. Presumably the organisers are as surprised as everybody else is by the scale of the response to what began life as a sort of mischievous wheeze.
Yes, exactly. It started life just as a bit of satire. I was speaking to one of the organisers earlier who said they've planned this since March. So initially when they heard that Trump was going to be coming, they designed the balloon. They talked to me through, how they went to design it. So I think a number of caricatures, cartoonists in newspapers will draw Trump a little bit babyish. So that's the focus they went on. They said that the final sort of pièce de résistance was the little phone with a blue screen stuck in his right, must be said, tiny hands. No doubt Trump will see this on Twitter. That's what they're hoping. He's not going to see it himself, of course, because he feels so unwelcomed by this balloon, this protest, and the other protests that are taking place in London as well, that he actually won't be casting his eyes skyward here in Parliament. But no, the protesters just thought initially this would be a bit of a laugh, a bit of a joke, and I think the fact that it was initially rejected, so initially they weren't allowed to fly it, they then put out a petition, and that really generated public interest. So many people signed up. They raised thousands of pounds in a sort of crowdfunding scheme, and then from there, of course, you had politicians saying, well, it shouldn't fly, it's a disgrace, it's offensive to Donald Trump, it's really going to harm the conversations he has with Theresa May. All of that just generated conversations on both sides of the Atlantic, and now, as I say, hundreds of people here right now. Many more have been coming and going throughout the 2 hours, and it's really become a bit of an icon. And the mini Donald Trump will be taking place. It'll be a real sort of focus, I think, in the protest later as well.
And finally, Rachel, what happens to it after this?
Well, after this, so it's got to be pulled down very safely at 11:30 this morning. And then I think there is the hope that this will go international. So I know other protesters in America, for example, have suggested that at other sort of similar protests, they might be able to send it abroad. They'll be hoping to bring it at other events. They wanted to take it to Scotland. They wanted to get it up to Glasgow, to where he's landing tonight, and then fly it over Turnberry tomorrow. But Police Scotland said no, it was a health and safety risk. It wasn't secure, and they weren't allowed to do that. So I think the amount of just focus and publicity this image has got, we will be seeing it again. I heard someone earlier saying they hoped that the Thanksgiving Day parade in America that goes through New York might feature the Trump baby blimp. They were an American. We shall see if that actually happens, of course. But no, I think this image you'll see again and again.
Any sign of Jazz from Crawley, who was going to fly his drone into the balloon, Rachel? He told us on
Jazz?
Monday.
No, I haven't. I can go.
But he sounded like a really big, brave man. He was definitely going to fly his drone into the balloon.
No sign of drones so far.
Well, how long has he got left? We'll phone him up. How long has he got left? When does it come?
35 minutes.
Come on, Jazz, big man, get yourself down there. I think we've already gone viral once this week. We could do it again. Rachel Venables, live from Parliament Square, where you have 35 minutes left, should you so desire, to see that balloon. Most interesting bit of that interview in The Sun, the bits that don't get filed under either psychotic or sociopathic, the bits that get filed under, we need to work out what's going on there. For me, it would be this bit here regarding Brexit.
I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree with it. She didn't listen to me.
What did you say?
She didn't listen. No, I told her how to do it. That will be up to her to say. But I told her how to do it. She wanted to go a different route.
That's brilliant.
So you would be prepared to walk away?
At all tell her what to do. He hasn't got a clue how it could have been done differently.
Absolutely.
That's clear to everybody. And you can hear in his own voice, just stop it, fade it down now, because we'll come back to that from the beginning. You can hear in his own voice the moment when he realises that he can't answer that question. I told her what to do, I told her what to do. He's like the lion, isn't he, in the Wizard of Oz? You put him up. I told her what to do. She ignored my advice. Tom Newton-Dunn, who's a good journalist. I know there's a great tendency in my profession to presume that if somebody works for a certain organisation, then they should be judged according to the company they keep. And I do understand why, and I'm sometimes a little bit guilty of it myself. But Michael Gove would have rolled over on that. Remember when Michael Gove did the Times interview without telling anyone that Rupert Murdoch was actually in the room? It's another one of those sentences that comes out of my mouth, and I think, crikey, how far we've fallen and how quickly. Michael Gove now in the cabinet conducting an interview with Donald Trump arranged by his billionaire boss Rupert Murdoch without telling the readers even of the Times, let alone the Sun. We know what the editor of the Sun thinks of Sun readers. Thinks they're like mushrooms. They should be kept in the dark and occasionally covered in manure. But the Times, the owner of the Times, of course, overrules all of the editors. And if he wants to sit in a room while Michael Gove interviews Donald Trump, that's absolutely fine. But Gove wouldn't have pushed. Tom Newton-Dunn pushed that. Listen again, and listen for the moment when Donald Trump realises that he can't answer this question because he's just lied again. There is nothing. Why wouldn't he say, well, I would have done this, this and this? I'll tell you why he didn't say, I would have done this, this, this and this. The same reason why Boris Johnson and David Davis resigned without offering up any alternative plan whatsoever for getting the country out of the mess that they've led it into. But this is beautiful.
I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree with it. She didn't listen to me.
What did you say?
She didn't listen. No, I told her how to do it. That will be up to her to say. But I told her how to do it. She wanted to go a different route.
So you would be prepared to walk away if they didn't give you the right terms?
Oh, absolutely. I think what's going on is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's too long. You know, deals that take too long.
Can we just do it once more? Because it's that lovely little moment that you go, I told her what to do. She didn't take my advice. She did. Oh yeah, what did you advise her to do then? Well, I told her to. You'll have to ask her.
I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree with it. She didn't listen to me.
What did you say?
She didn't listen. No, I told her how to do it. That will be up to her to say. But I told her how to do it. She wanted to go a different route.
So you would be prepared to walk away if they didn't give you the right terms?
Oh, absolutely. I think what's going on is very unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's too long. You know, deals that take too long are never good ones.
Didn't even get, oh, Lord above, yeah, deals that take too long are never good ones. You should just rush in there with your eyes shut and just start swinging. Well, that is what Brexit is, of course, now. It's close your eyes and run in whatever direction you happen to be facing. That's what no deal is. So, again, Newton Dunn did a good job there. So you'd have walked away with no deal. We know that no deal planning at the moment would turn Dover into a car park and involve bringing... this is true, even I can't believe it, and I've been telling you this stuff for 2 years. Bringing generators back from war zones, places like Afghanistan where we have generators in place to power camps and similar. We'd have to bring them back and stick them in the Irish Sea to ensure that the lights didn't go off in Northern Ireland. This is government-owned planning. And remember, the Sun itself reported that they're going to have to stockpile processed food in the event of no deal. I'm about still 50-50 on that happening. But if it did happen, as Donald Trump just said he would definitely have gone down that road of bringing generators back from Afghanistan to keep the lights out in Northern Ireland and consigning the country to a diet of stockpiled spam and, go on then, umbongo. And it is one of those rare moments where we can at least begin our conversations in complete agreement with each other, even if we sing from very different hymn sheets politically and morally. The President of the United States of America is a pathological liar. But one analysis of that simple fact that we've heard this morning is that his admirers love that. It's not a question of holding their nose and ignoring it because he allows them to feel less ashamed of their bigotries and failures. It's actually pleasurable to them to see him lying because the system that has rendered these people so scared and angry is getting ridden roughshod over by the big man, the big orange man baby. I hadn't heard that before. My apologies for being taken by surprise on it. The plausibility of it is almost irresistible, isn't it? Why don't they care more? They don't. But it's not a question of not caring more. They actively love the lies because the lies make a mockery of the system that they have to blame for their lives. And, of course, if they can't blame the system or the immigration or the foreigners for it, then they'd have to blame themselves. And if you're right-wing, I think this is doubly attractive, because if you're right-wing and you've ended up on the wrong side of success, then really it's obviously your fault, because you voted for the system that enriches tiny minorities at the expense of everybody else, but you fell for the notion that you'd be on the winning side. So you've spent your whole life voting and arguing. Brexit's very much like this. No, I absolutely voted to be poorer. And people are now saying that out loud rather than admitting they were conned or that they've gone the wrong way their entire life. If you have voted to uphold a system that sees money flowing more and more towards a tiny number of people at the top, basically Donald Trump's billionaire backers, Rupert Murdoch, people like that, all of it now is flowing. It's a 19th century speed of traffic. You have a choice. You either go, oh my God, I've spent my whole life being played for a mug. I am one of the people that would still vote for him if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue. You either face that reality, or you reach around for another reason why things still haven't gone your way. And that's how you end up cheering someone telling lies, because that means the system can be broken, or this nonsense about the deep state. Have you heard this? This is one of the latest lines they use. The deep state. It's all about the deep state. So the reason why things are going wrong is because of all our invisible enemies. You're one step away from fairies at the bottom of the garden. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, talking about lies today, and I see no reason to stop. Andy's in Clapham. Andy, sorry to keep you. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I have to say, first of all, congratulations on talking about what's been happening in Derry. I was a BBC journalist for 4 years in Northern Ireland, and I know you're talking about that later, and you're giving it coverage. But I wanted to talk to you as a joke. I'm a writer and broadcaster and journalist myself, and it just interested me hearing you talk about people willingly accepting Trump's lies. Yes. And it just struck a chord with me as a journalist, the conversations I've had recently with people in the press about the way journalism encourages that. And I know it's not a new point to make, but I think it's more important than ever now, is the way online clicks and online traffic and the bump rate from articles plays its part in this, that journalists more and more, particularly the new generation of journalists coming through, are trained from the word go to think only in primary colours and looking for those sound bites, looking for things that will make people read on. And I was taught when I started learning to be an online journalist, which was new for me because it was,
Yes.
I'm old enough to know when that came around. It was a new thing. I was told, do you know what? Most people don't read beyond the first paragraph.
Yes.
So you've got to make it really, really compelling to keep people reading. And I was having lunch with a UK tabloid newspaper editor, one of the editors there a couple of weeks ago. And she said, even the brightest, most intelligent, most diligent journalists that I'm getting through now have been brought up in this world where actually they don't worry about the detail. They're not really interested in real veracity in their journalism. They're actually more interested in, okay, what's going to keep people reading and going to stop people from moving away from what I'm writing.
It's fascinating to hear you see that generationally, because I think you just described Kelvin Mackenzie.
Well, I've done a bit of presenting work with Kelvin recently, but
Well, I don't want you to urinate on your own doorstep, but the idea that it's a modern development to have people who call themselves journalists peddling profound untruths in the pursuit of a populist response. I put my faith in the younger generation, and you're trying to rob me of it.
You're right. It's always been obviously an element, particularly in the tabloid press. Of course it has. But I think what's really worried and unnerved me is the fact that journalists who maybe don't have that outlook, and also broadcasters and...
Well, you're saying they don't care about the truth.
And moving into that world too.
They feed off each other, because if the President of the United States of America can tell 100 lies in a single speech, and the story isn't that he's told 100 lies in a single speech, then lies somehow become normalised, and they move from being 100 lies in a single speech to the next morning being 2 lies in a single headline. And if it gets 1,000 clicks within 10 seconds, then there'll be 3 lies in the next headline.
Well, if you just look at the debate that's going on around the Trump baby, #TrumpBaby balloon, that in its own right, the reason that's massive is not because the thing itself is massive. I think you've just established that actually it's quite
professionally
small when it's up in the air. It's because it's a great picture.
Yes.
That's why it's had such an impact. But the coverage of that balloon has itself been, I think, quite black and white. I'm against the blimp, but not because I'm a supporter of Trump. I just feel it strikes a weird note.
Yes, I don't like it, and I think it's distracted from the things we should have been talking about. But I thought that Sadiq Khan's account of why he couldn't be the one to burst it was pretty compelling. But then again, you see what you've just done. You've just been nuanced. You don't like it, but not for a binary reason. You wish it couldn't be there, but if you're like me, you understand why it is.
It doesn't get the clicks.
That's not going to get any clicks at all. No.
And that's the problem. But when you've got newspaper editors saying the people who are coming through are very intelligent and want to be great journalists, but I'm having to turn them around and point them towards detailing fact and asking probing questions and then writing a long, involved online piece on it. Because they come back to me and say, well, yeah, but I've been told no one will read it anyway. So
I'm more optimistic than you, but I suspect that you might have slightly more evidence to back up your position than I do mine. The long reads are coming back in. When you register the weaponisation of lies, I think younger journalists will, but then they have to find outlets that aren't in hock to the clickbait, don't they? And that's why the future will probably be some sort of self-starting, smaller operations growing, rather than people, when we were coming into the business, trying to get jobs in organisations that were already huge.
Well, I see some hope in podcasts, I've got to say. I know it's a bad thing to say on a live radio programme.
No, not at all. Of course it's not. They can both happily coexist.
Explore difficult, complex questions with nuance, and that's fantastic. But the simple truth is, all you have to do is look at I don't know what yours is like, I dread to think, but if your Facebook feed is anything like mine, people are willfully and joyfully sharing these untruths.
Yes.
Not necessarily because they even know a slightest thing about what they're talking about, but because it just triggers them in one way or another.
And I think they get a dopamine hit from likes and shares, even if they're liking and sharing lies. They get done. I mean, there you go. That is your alt-right in a nutshell. And I worry, actually, just to add to the bleak analysis, I worry that we might see a further hardening of the divisions between what you could describe as the Facebook Daily Mail comments section people who struggle to read in structures of more than one sentence, and who love the immediate visceral response and don't care whether it's true or not, and then the what we loosely describe as the metropolitan liberal elites who like understanding stuff, and so they'll be drawn to the podcast, but the people who really need the help are the people existing on an unleavened diet of lies and hate. And, of course, we're back to the theory that they actually like being lied to, because it shows that the big man who's going to protect them from the non-existent enemies, immigrants and Muslims in this case, Jews, if you go back to the 1930s, the big man can protect us from them. And if he can lie and get away with it, that just proves how powerful he is. I'd really like someone to shoot that down, actually, that lie, not the balloon. Martin's in Milton Keynes. Martin, what would you like to say?
Oh, just, first, go a bit easy on me. I'm a first-time caller.
Always, mate. Mr. Gentle, that's what they call me. Go on.
Well, 2 points, really. First is the Trump's lies. It's like you say, it's bubble politics. It's the echo chamber. It's what people want to hear, so no one wants to be told that they're wrong, and they hear it, they agree with it, and then it reinforces their own opinion, and it's just an endless cycle of, I'm right.
But how can it be? I mean, he stands up in Brussels yesterday and says, for the second or third time in a week, that he won Wisconsin and Ronald Reagan didn't. And this isn't like claiming something that, the sun isn't going to come up tomorrow, something that is almost certainly not true, but which you can't actually prove until tomorrow. Do you see what I mean? Or you can literally just look in the rear-view mirror. You can literally just Google it, and there it is. It's a bare-faced lie. The Turnberry line, which goes unchallenged in the Sun, so I'll take back some of the compliments I just paid to Tom Newton-Dunn. I was cutting a ribbon for the Turnberry opening the day before the Brexit vote. I said Brexit will happen. There's pictures of him cutting the ribbon at Turnberry the day after the Brexit vote. He was in the air.
But the people who enjoy those lies don't want to go and see if there's a photo.
But I've just told them.
Yeah, but they don't want to hear that. So Trump's their guy, you're not.
And what does he get? What do they get back from him?
It's a sense of satisfaction, isn't it? It's the, the reinforcement of their own opinion.
Which is that brown people are to blame for everything.
In a way, different people voted for him for different reasons, but it's like...
Did they really?
Some did. He applied... It's the people in America, the little guys that were convinced that, the reason that all the jobs were leaving their state and that kind of thing, they didn't necessarily vote for him because of racism. They voted because they believed the lie that he wasn't going to,
But now the truth is emerging. They end up essentially saying, I don't care if he's wrecking the country, the planet, the rule of law, the Constitution, our alliances and our security. He lets me blame my life on Muslims and immigrants, so I love him.
Yeah, essentially.
Well, this is very bleak. I mean, how could you know that about yourself and still be cool with everything? Because you think that the crunch is going to come and it's going to hurt people who aren't like you. The people who are going to get hurt are the intellectuals, the immigrants, the Muslims, the foreigners, the brown people,
everyone wants someone
the
to
gay
blame
people,
for their
the
own
Jews.
issues.
Yeah, I don't.
So the second point that I wanted to make was about what the media could do about it.
Yes, go on.
There's the very good video of Trump's ambassador to, I think it's the Netherlands or Belgium, I'm not sure, where he'd previously been recorded saying that, there were Islamist no-go zones and politicians' cars were being set on fire. And, the Dutch news approached him and said, you said this, like, what's your thoughts on it now that you're the ambassador to Holland? And he said, oh, no, that's fake news.
I never said that. Fake news, you're right.
And then they turned around and said, well, here's a video of you saying it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what happens here, like I know your friend Rees Mogg, your sticking point with the Sun's trade deals that are going to save us money.
I mean, the Sun retracted it, but he didn't.
Exactly, but he's never been, to my knowledge, I hold my hands up and say I don't follow every single political programme on earth, but to my knowledge, no one's ever said to him, look, the Sun retracted it, are you going to retract it? Or there's no, politicians can tell a barefaced lie.
Yeah, but do you know what would happen? Here's the thing, you see, is that if you're getting an easy ride off a right-wing journalist, then why the hell would you come on a programme like this?
Yeah, that is the issue. But I mean, like...
So even the Dutch model, the Dutch model you describe, which I've seen a few times and it's brilliant, that was a hijack. There's no earthly way that ambassador is going to sit down in a studio with the journalist that pulled his pants down on live television, is there?
But then the same issue, then people wouldn't be able to go on News... If Newsnight pulled the same hijack, essentially, then they wouldn't be on News... If that were to happen and they boycott Newsnight, they're not on Newsnight the first time round telling the lie.
Yeah, and well, Newsnight and some of the other heritage programmes enjoy a slightly different status, although you don't really see cabinet-level people putting their head above the parapet as often as you did in our childhood. But yeah, I think you're actually right.
That's a compliment, if ever.
Well, I mean, you're right on both fronts, because if you deny yourself the oxygen of publicity, then you presumably deny yourself political progress. The problem is, and Newsnight's a good example of this, the problem is that if I decided never to appear on that programme again, I could just pick up the phone and appear on 3 others by Sunday. Do you see what I mean?
It requires everyone to knuckle down.
It requires absolutely everyone to knuckle down. So if you're going to have someone like Steve Bannon in the studio, you hit him again and again and again with his comments about wearing racism as a badge of honour. You hit him with the fact that the news website that he helped to found has sections dedicated to crimes committed by black people without any comparative section for crimes committed by white people. You just go and you take the quotes, like you mentioned, like the Dutch ambassador, the American ambassador to Holland. You have the clip of him actually saying stuff. But it doesn't matter because, you know, the country today, London today, is full of people, absolutely chock-a-block with people who were adamant that Barack Obama had absolutely no right to comment on Brexit, despite being invited to do so by the British Prime Minister. So the people who thought that the American president commenting on British politics at the invitation of the British Prime Minister was absolutely egregiously out of order, today they're perfectly comfortable with an American president publicly insulting a British Prime Minister. It's the same question about Sadiq Khan and terrorism, isn't it? What could possibly be the difference between Barack Obama and Donald Trump that prompts some people to say the former should shut up and sit down, while the latter should be allowed to do whatever he wants? I've got a world exclusive with Boris Johnson coming up on the question of the single market. After that, can we give James Cleverly a ring? Is he deputy chairman of the Conservative Party? Give him a ring, will you? See if he's got anything to say about Michael Fabricant tweeting that disgusting image. And where are all the people who said you have to respect the office of Donald Trump when they were talking about a utterly innocuous balloon of him as a nappy-clad baby? You have to respect the office, even if you don't respect the person who holds the office. Yes, obviously this only refers to a balloon mocking a man who puts babies on trial and tells barefaced lies every time he opens his mouth. The actual barefaced liars who put babies on trial and stand accused of multiple sexual assaults are obviously completely free to disrespect the office of the British Prime Minister and the Mayor of London. Elected British politicians are fair game for Donald Trump, but Barack Obama should have stayed quiet on the question of British politics when he was asked to intervened by a British Prime Minister. It's very strange, that double standard, isn't it? A few of you are suggesting there might be a clue to the answer in the fact that Boris Johnson chose to describe Barack Obama as half Kenyan after that comment. Are you suggesting, Boris Johnson, that a black president should be held to different moral standards to an orange one? Because there's a word for that sort of attitude, isn't there? In the same way, I wonder whether or not a Muslim mayor somehow being linked to Islamist terrorism by Donald Trump in a way that no one could ever imagine happening to a non-Muslim mayor, Ken Livingstone. It's almost as if you're judging a brown Muslim mayor by different standards than a white non-Muslim one. There's a word for that as well, isn't there? I'm sure I'm wrong. I'm sure that, you know, they'll be queuing up to explain to me why this is a perfect example of consistency and objectivity, and people in my profession, let alone people on the political stage, absolutely do not judge people differently according to their colour or background. It is all about the behaviour. So anyone who has said to you, you have to respect the office of the American president while talking about a mildly amusing balloon would presumably be apoplectic today about Donald Trump's assault upon the office of the British Prime Minister and the office of the elected Mayor of London. Maybe the bus got delayed. 24 minutes after 11 is the time. Here's my world exclusive with Boris Johnson on future relations between the United Kingdom and the European Union.
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
Hey? Let's hear that again.
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
Oh, sorry, that wasn't a world exclusive. That was before the referendum. Oh, dear. And we think Donald Trump is the biggest liar in town. John's in Reading. John, what's going on?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect too much about that complaint form, mate, because I remember a year or so ago, there was a Tory MP said the N-word in Parliament and she got a slap on the wrist, so don't expect too much.
No, she got suspended. I don't know if she didn't say in Parliament. She said the N-word in the woodpile, didn't she, at a private meeting she didn't know was recorded, but I think she got reinstated just as they had a tough vote coming in. The whip was restored. But yeah, I mean, you might be right. But I'm sure James Cleverly will talk to us. He's a very accessible member of the government.
Yeah.
What did you ring in to mention?
Right, so what I rang in to mention is he's playing back to his base in America. So but his base in America have got two forms of news. They've got Fox News and President Trump, and they're not listening to anything else. So anything else that the other news medias are saying at the moment, they're not listening to. So President Trump could basically say whatever he wants about these countries, about the leaders, and they'll just believe him because they've got no other news to back it up with.
So these are the people tweeting me to say that London is an S-hole, and Big Ben has been shut down so that the call to prayer can be heard from a nearby mosque, that we've got no-go zones and Sharia patrols, and you can say to these people, I have lived in London since 1991. I've lived in every zone from 1 to 4. I walk routinely through every part of London, east, west, north, south, because I prefer to walk than get a car when I've got other jobs on, because I get there a little bit quicker. And I've never seen any of these things, but someone in Texas with their head up their backside is absolutely convinced that our country is compromised. And then, of course, you can find a couple of traitors and fag packet fascists to turn up on Fox News with English accents and agree with the racist lies.
So you've got, for example, the half of Donald Trump supporters. It sounds odd, but you've got half of Donald Trump supporters which are absolutely deplorable racists and should never let near the light day
the
again.
Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazi, the Charlottesville rally,
exactly.
that constituency.
But you've also got what a lot of people don't really speak about is you've got the other half, which are from working class communities, which have been let down by the Democratic Party, and not actually. So, for example, the Democratic Party, which has been over flooded by large donor money, and you get like these sort of candidates, they had to raise to become a candidate. Unlike our country, in Parliament, we have something called short money, where a parliamentarian can get money from...
You don't need to have huge amounts of donations to get elected to a liberal or a left-wing position in this country.
Exactly. So in America, you have to raise around $3 million or so, and the normal person's not going to have that sort of money in place.
There's a new Labour parallel here as well, isn't there? Because the neoliberal free market ideology took hold on both sides of politics in America and Britain, the notion that you have to let business lead almost. There's an editorial in the Daily Mail today that says, look what happens when you interfere in the free market, attacking George Osborne's buy-to-let policies. So if you buy into the notion that business trumps, pardon the pun, everything, then you do leave an awful lot of people feeling unrepresented by the Democrats and the Labour Party, even if traditionally they think of themselves as right-wing.
So the interesting thing is, James, if you ever get a chance to, there's someone I really want you to interview. It's a bloke called Seth Huger, and he's in charge of one of the biggest news organisations in the world on the independent news.
Well, send me an email. I'll have a look. Seriously.
He's absolutely incredible. So it's a news organisation called Young Turks. The Young Turks is a progressive independent organisation. He's actually very similar to your background.
Oh my God, poor soul.
He's an ex-Republican, but he turned over to the Democrat. He's very centralist, and he doesn't have...
Well, I'll dig it out. I'll have a look. You'll understand. I can't indulge these sort of conversations for too long because, like me, the massive majority of people listening won't know quite what we're talking about. But bung us an email, and I'll definitely have a dig in. Interesting questions, 03456060973 about lies and dishonesty. Speaking of which, if you've just tuned in, we've got a special message for you from Boris Johnson, who Donald Trump, of course, believes would make a good Prime Minister.
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
In the age of Trump, of course, I can translate that for you. I absolutely loathe the single market. We have no business being in the single market at all, and anybody who suggests I have ever expressed enthusiasm for the single market is a great big liar with pants on fire. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines. Theo's here. Have you heard my exclusive?
No, what's your exclusive?
Boris Johnson on the single market. I got him last night. I was doorstepping him outside his house. Do you want to hear it?
Go on.
Seriously, it's really good.
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
It was last night. I was outside his house with a microphone. He'd had a few drinks.
Really?
No, before the referendum.
Before the referendum, yeah.
So, Donald Trump and Theresa May have been appearing in public together after her humiliation at his hands this morning. History suggests that she probably didn't take the opportunity to do a Hugh Grant from the film Love Actually.
You would be right. Donald Trump arrived about half an hour ago in the Beast limousine, American presidential limousine, at Chequers to be greeted by Theresa May on the steps of Chequers, her country retreat. They went inside for what we term in the trade as the spray, when photographers and cameramen get their shots of the happy couple together. And Donald Trump was asked about NATO and his achievements, or his achievements in his own view, at the summit in Brussels yesterday.
What we do, the Prime Minister and I worked very hard together in NATO, and those are incredible 2 days. It's never been more united. People are paying. Talking trade, we're talking military. We just looked at some incredible
I can't make head nor tail of that, mate. I've got headphones on in a state-of-the-art studio, so if I had it on in the car or on the building site, I don't know what I just would have heard then. So you tell us what was said.
He said that they'd made progress on the military, they'd made progress on NATO spending, ensuring that European countries spent up to their 2% commitment. Of course, Theresa May then said that Britain spent their 2% of GDP on defence, which is what she thinks should be required. Donald Trump was then asked about whether he regretted his interview in The Sun this morning, and he did that face where he sort of puffed out his cheeks and pursed his lips and shook his head. And
can you remember giving it?
I don't know, but he was asked, and then the reporter was sort of kicked out of the room fairly unceremoniously.
Oh, really?
Yeah, booted. That done, because that happens at the press conference. So we'll get more questions at the press conference, which is after lunch.
Oh no! So I can't do a live commentary on it.
I think it. Yeah, no, you're going to miss it. Everybody's talking about your live commentary from yesterday, James. They're all talking about it.
Yeah. Who's everybody?
Well, you know, all the.
Oh, I'm clutching my pearls.
Everybody's, yeah.
Well, that's why we have to do it. This is the next chapter of journalism.
Yeah.
You can't report, because, I mean, even front-page newspapers in America will say Trump claims or Trump says, but you just have to say that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. Admittedly, you'll end up having very little time to do anything else in your personal life or your professional life, but that's a lie as well. Reagan didn't win Wisconsin. Reagan did win Wisconsin. North Korea is giving up its nuclear power. North Korea has increased its production of nuclear product. That's why everyone's talking about it. But you've made me feel a bit uncomfortable now. You know I hate talking about myself. Theo, thank you very much indeed. We might see you again before 1 o'clock, the way things are going. Did you see the balloon? Did you see the balloon at all?
Yeah, saw the balloon.
Yeah, we're having a bit of a whip round for a Theo Usherwood balloon in time for Christmas. I'll let you know how we get on. Philip's in Guildford. Philip, what's going on? Philip, make some sense. Make some sense of it all. Burst the balloons, Philip, and let the light shine on.
I'm going to try, James, but I've been fascinated by your conversation about the lies, and I'm befuddled by the whole thing. But the one thing that I wanted to say was about the balloon. And now I kind of was on the side of thinking it was a bit puerile and what have you. And I've actually changed my mind, and I've come to the conclusion it's the perfect response. And this is my reason why. I was saying to your researcher that one of the critical things that all imposters crave more than anything else, the one thing that they absolutely demand, is to be taken seriously. And
that's the thing they crave. I guess if you don't have any self-respect, if you don't like yourself, you have to get all of your validation and approbation from outside.
From others. Yes. Exactly. And the one we've tried to call him out on his lies, and it's water off a duck's back. We've tried over the years to call him out on his misdeeds, and similarly it just boosts his ego.
So he keeps saying they like me. He likes me. He said, I've got a lot of time for Boris Johnson. He really likes me.
So what we're actually doing in putting up the balloon, ultimately, in the context of their needs to be taken seriously, is we're laughing at him. We're laughing at him. In the end, that's all we can do. We can either shrug our shoulders and say, OK, you win, we'll just have to keep on listening to you, or we can just go into gales and paroxysms of laughter. If he gets to the stage tomorrow and tried to address a group of 500 people on something really serious, and as soon as he stood up there, everyone just burst out laughing.
And no one played my music. You know what I wanted to do? Were you listening? I was going to play the Benny Hill music wherever he went.
Oh, Well, that's it. That's exactly the Benny Hill thing. That is the thing. It's so beautiful because ultimately, that's all we can do is laugh at them. You mentioned earlier
But
on...
I used to say, I used to say that about the kind of Al-Qaeda, ISIS type people. Everyone else in this business was inviting them onto their programs and shouting at them and getting really angry. And I just used to say, point and laugh. If you don't point and laugh, they will grow in strength, they will grow in influence, and some idiot over there 10 years from now will be persuaded to blow himself up in a pop concert because we've treated these inadequate hate preachers like, really important villains.
Exactly. They are imposters. That's ultimately what they are.
But why then? What about the psychology of the supporters then? Because that first call we took today is going to be one of those calls that stays with me forever. Because you presume and I presume that if we get lied to, we turn on the person that lied to us. Even if it takes a long time sometimes to break through the self-regard and the ego that's invested in our original mistake. Eventually we have to admit the mistake. We have to admit that we fell for it. It's
surreal because...
the emperor has no clothes on.
The normal response to somebody or from somebody who has been lied to is to feel a certain degree of resentment towards the person who lied to them because you think so. Because you're taking, you think exactly. You think you're insulting my intelligence. You're taking me for an idiot. So people, but yet, counterintuitively, people are not taking that opinion. They're lapping it up. So all I can say is, when you mentioned, by no means a crude man, but when you mentioned earlier on. After the balloon thing, we should just tell them off you float.
Yes.
I thought, well, perfect. We should henceforth, perhaps, if it's not too unkind, refer to him as the giant orange floater. And
leave it there. That's perfect. Thank you, Philip. It's 11:42. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Philip suggesting that POTUS should become floater. It possibly has some poetry to it. The problem is, of course, when you're doing the point and laugh thing, as I used to say about people like Anjem Chowdhury and Omar Bakri Mohammed, one of them rang up. It was the one that rang up shouting at us because we'd been teasing him, and I remember saying at the time, this is how you deal with these people. Listen to how angry he is. The one who ended up being deported, who had a hooked hand, he rang up screaming at us just before he got. I think it was one of them anyway. And they couldn't bear being ridiculed and mocked. That's the thing about fundamentalist liars. That's the thing about inadequate hate preachers. That's the one thing they can't do. But what did? We invited them onto programmes, we interviewed them, we took them seriously, we wrote long articles about how dangerous they were, and it came true. It's too late, again, with far-right politicians in the White House, far-right politicians and advisors in the White House. You can't start pointing and laughing now, because arguably Well, do we need them for trade? Because that was the other thing that we should add to the conversation for the final hour of the programme. Can somebody explain this to me? If you are, and I can kind of understand why you wouldn't ring in to explain why you like being lied to. I won't hold that against you. I don't think I'd do that if the boot was on the other foot. But let's agree on what Donald Trump has said about trade and the European Union, right? So Donald Trump has said that the European Union gets by far the best of current trading arrangements between America and the European Union, right? So why would it be in our interests to leave, then? 0345 6060 973. I know that this is like garlic to a vampire for all people who hate thinking, but I can't help it. These are the questions I need answering. So you can stand up and say two things that, to me, are utterly contradictory. Here's the question, okay? If Donald Trump is right, so if you choose to believe him, or if indeed there is evidence to support him, which, let's be honest, is unlikely, but perhaps not impossible, when he says that America gets a really bad deal out of trade with the EU, that the EU has by far the best end of those arrangements, even though there's no FTA in place. As things stand, that's what the EU does. It wins, in Trump's opinion, which I think is wrong, but let's pretend he's right. This is a lovely exercise in pretending that he might be right about something. So if he's right when he says that the EU gets a much better deal out of US-EU trading than America does, how could it be in our interests to leave? And strike up a bilateral agreement with an administration whose trade secretary has already described Brexit as a wonderful opportunity for American businesses to hoover up damaged British interests. And why would Rupert Murdoch be putting all this on the front page of his newspaper? Riddle me that. On LBC, where we have a whole heap of questions that are in need of answers. Not least that last one that we asked. If we pretend for a moment, and I appreciate perhaps you don't need to pretend because you've been persuaded that it's actually true. But I need to pretend because I know that it isn't. Donald Trump is right when he says that the European Union has a much better end of trade than America does. So the European Union benefits hugely from trading with America to the detriment of America. It's not true. It's part of Donald Trump's attempt to portray privilege as victimhood. But if it was true, why would he be telling us to leave the European Union? If it's such a powerful trading entity, if it's such a powerful market, which it obviously is, why would one of our allies want us to leave it? I'll take any answer you've got to that question, because I've got a horrible feeling that it's not going to get asked anywhere else. Why would our so-called ally want to us to leave an organisation that he describes himself as having triumphed over America on the issue of trade? 0345 6060 973 is a number to call. And I would love to do a bit of psychology on Boris Johnson. Does anyone want to have a crack at explaining this U-turn that's just sort of popped up on our radar? The fact that he, before, I just get the exact date of that actually, before the referendum, stating categorically his support for the single market, and now at the behest of Rupert Murdoch, he's pretending that leaving the single market would be anything other than disastrous for Britain. Nick's in Nottingham. Nick, steer us back onto an even keel. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think the issue here, it all comes down to this word division, doesn't it? It comes down to...
Nick, mate, I'm so sorry. I've got a guest on the line that I've forgotten about. I'll be with you imminently, but I need to introduce... Well, for a couple of reasons, actually. I need to introduce... Leona O'Neill, who's with the Irish News and joins me on the line now, because I got a tweet this morning from one of my Irish listeners saying, just something to keep in mind, James. I've been listening to your show for the Brexit analysis without bias. Sixth night of rioting in Derry, loyalist bombing Catholic area, and PSNI, that's the Police Service of Northern Ireland, coming under gun attack. Loyalists are burning Irish and EU flags on bonfires. And Seamus adds, it's already here. Leona, I mean, I suppose I have to ask you whether or not there's any embellishments or exaggerations in that description from one of my listeners.
I don't think it's too much to do with Brexit, James, to be honest. It's more to do with kind of tensions that have been ongoing here for a number of years.
That was just his reason for listening to the programme, not necessarily his reason for the rioting. So talk us through the rioting, and it has been 6 nights, has it?
It's been 6 consecutive nights now of sustained rioting in the Bogside area. If you could picture the scene, the Bogside is kind of at the bottom of a hill here in Derry. Halfway up the hill, we've got the ancient historic walls that people walk around, and behind that again, further on up the hill, there have the Protestant Fountain Estate. And actually it started about 2 weeks ago, where youth started throwing petrol bombs and missiles in over. We have a peace line at the Fountain Estate, which is where the Protestant people live. We have a wall and then, a fence on top of that to stop these exact type of attacks. So petrol bombs started coming over the wall. Youth were throwing them there, and they were landing in people's homes. And this was happening even during the day. It seemed to come out of nowhere, really, but it was in a build-up to the Orange Order marching season. Yesterday was the 12th of July, where the Orange Men would celebrate. They would have their 12th celebrations. So this went on, and 6 consecutive nights now we've had disorder in the Bogside, where it's almost like a dance, James. It's around 8 o'clock at night, they start to gather, then they start burning barricades across the roads leading into the Bogside to prevent traffic coming in. In an attempt to draw in police position themselves up on the walls. They start firing petrol bombs at the police, and then it turned a bit sinister then during the week whenever they fired a semi-automatic weapon from the Bogside up to the walls, and it took chunks out of the walls, but thankfully didn't hit anyone. And then we had pipe bombs, blast bombs thrown at the police on Wednesday night, and then again last night. Last night was like a scene from a war zone in the Bogside, actually, and around in and around the Bogside, where we had hundreds of riot police. We had 74 petrol bombs thrown in total, 2 blast bombs. We had a youth throw a petrol bomb. A van was driving through the area because it is a very, very busy thoroughfare. We had a man in a van driving a van through the area, and a youth just walked out in front of him and threw a petrol bomb directly at his windscreen. If it had broken and went in, he would have been burnt alive. There's no doubt about that. So we have a number of attempted murder attempts by these youths, not only on members of the public, but also nightly attacks on the police here. So it's complete mayhem at the minute.
By way of context, I mean, people my age will remember seeing images like this from the province. But in recent years, how remarkable is this behaviour?
It is quite remarkable. Now, we have had no real trouble like this, sustained, serious trouble like this for a number of years. Derry in particular, I know that sometimes it seems from Belfast can bubble up and explode at sort of, with regards to flag issues and stuff like that. Derry seems to be has been on an even keel for a long time, and we were actually held up as a model of good practice with regards Orange Order marches and how we handle them and how they're very peaceful and stuff. But yesterday was just a complete change, a complete contrast to that, where there were actually tensions, obviously, and with regards to the Orange March coming through the city. There were 23,000 Orange men marched through the city yesterday. The march passed off peacefully, but there were protesters there, and there hadn't been in a number of years, and then that is where this trouble started there last night, following on from that.
What's the received wisdom on why? I appreciate you may not want to or be able to answer that question, but why now?
Yeah, well, there are a number of perceptions on the ground about why this has happened, and some people say that it's just advanced antisocial behaviour from these young people.
And the hot weather, all the usual explanations.
Yeah, that some say there are dissident Republican elements behind it, and the gun attack and the bomb attacks would have obviously would back that theory up. But dissident Republican sources say that it's not that; it's disaffected and marginalised youth given a voice to their frustration. This is an area, the Bogside would be an area of poverty, a disadvantaged area, and they say that this is a sort of a mirror of that, as these young people voicing their frustrations. But you would argue obviously that there are other ways to do that.
No, of course, but that makes it more akin to the London riots or the riots that we saw on the mainland after the Mark Duggan incident, as opposed to what you'd call as traditionally sectarian violence.
Well, it started, as I say, James, it started 2 weeks ago where youth out of the blue just started firing petrol bombs into Protestant homes. So that was an effort to draw in police, and that would then lend itself to the dissident Republican kind of, ethos of attacking the police. So, and the nightly burning of the barricades, that's also an effort to draw in the police forces. And they have been making murder attempts on police officers. So it's hard to tell exactly. And because we can't speak to these youths and ask them, what is going on? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? What do you want? Then everyone draws their own conclusions to this. But it's total mayhem at night here. It's really bad that this is a picture that we're painting across the world, basically, of our city. Not even a mile away, we have this huge Clipper Festival, which is the boats, the yacht race, the World Yacht Race is coming into Derry here, and literally a mile away there are hundreds of thousands of people going to be coming along the quay and enjoying the good weather, enjoying the food and stuff like that, and literally a stone's throw away you have this absolute mayhem going on. It's crazy.
And finally, I hear the various theories that have been put forward. Does sort of the DUP's position in the British government at the moment, I think the answer to my question is going to be no, but does that have any relevance to what's been going on the ground?
Yeah, well, the DUP in government, they're in government in Westminster, but here in Northern Ireland we do not have a functioning government. The DUP and Sinn Féin are at odds, and they can't even sit in the same room together. That vacuum, that political vacuum, has created a void where these dissident Republicans, in my opinion, groups can, grow. They can get a foothold, and that is a dangerous situation.
Because power abhors a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much indeed, Leona O'Reilly. I feel a bit embarrassed that we haven't been... O'Neill, I do apologise. I was at school with an O'Reilly. Leona O'Neill from the Irish News. I'm a little bit embarrassed there to concede how late we are to the party, but as Seamus has just learned, if you think there's stuff going on that perhaps we're getting distracted from by Brexit and Trump and all the other shenanigans, just let me know and I'll do my best to clear things up. 6 nights of riots in Derry. Whatever the reason is, and Leona provided us with a few theories, no one's going to try to portray that as a positive, except possibly Donald Trump, to whom we will return after the latest news bulletin. Poor old Nick in Nottingham, I gave him one little sniff. Well, I gave a tiny glimpse of the rabbit, and he was off like a greyhound, and then I had to put him back in the stalls again. We'll be up first with Nick. I shall spare you another torturous introduction, but the trade element really intrigues me now. Nobody thinks that we could be better off outside the European Union striking up a bilateral trade deal with an America that would love nothing more than to ride roughshod over the regulations that we have in place to keep our workers dignified and our products safe. The problem is, of course, that so many workers feel they've already lost so much of their dignity that they'll approach any port in a storm without realising that they're really floating into the proverbial lion's mouth. A bit on trade next, but still lots more on Trump. It turns out that's why Hugh Grant is trending on Twitter. I thought I'd been a genius when I said to Theo Usherwood that presumably Theresa May didn't avail herself of the opportunity to make like Hugh Grant did at the end of the film Love Actually. I noticed Hugh Grant's everyone. I must be the 10 millionth person in the country to make that observation. I don't remember that scene very well. It's the one with Martine McCutcheon in it, isn't it? Is the American president a bit of a monster? And Hugh Grant just kind of chucks the rule book out the window. And should we see if we can dig that out? Is it worth having a listen to? Like kind of what Theresa May should have said at the press conference? Just see if it works. I love this. We're producing stuff live on the radio. Speaking of which, my thanks to Incorrigible FCA for a quick link to Jacob Rees-Mogg's furious response to Donald Trump intervening in American politics. This is what Jacob Rees-Mogg has had to say this morning. It's splendidly arrogant of Donald Trump to lecture Brits on the EU. Oh, no, hang on. Sorry, I've misread that. Jacob Rees-Mogg said that Barack Obama is splendidly arrogant to lecture Brits on the EU, and he's described Trump's lecturing Brits on the EU as perfectly reasonable. So again, I kind of wonder what the big difference is in terms of what rights people should have, not in terms of the actual question. So why would Barack Obama not have the right to accept an invitation from the British Prime Minister to talk about the European Union, but Donald Trump should have the right to publicly insult a British Prime Minister while talking about the European Union? It's a really strange one, that, isn't it? What is it about Barack Obama that makes people like Jacob Rees-Mogg think that he should shut up and know his place, whereas people like Donald Trump should actually be allowed to publicly abuse our sovereign Prime Minister? I'll let you think on that, because Nick in Nottingham's probably, he might have fallen off his perch by now, Nick. I'm going to just shut up and let you speak, mate. What did you ring in to say?
James, I'm going to try and bring together Trump, Brexit and even Northern Ireland, if that's not too ambitious.
Yeah, bring it.
I think the common thread here is division, and I think that there's way too much of the hatred and division in the world right now. I think Trump is the arch exponent of that. He's stirring that up like no other and using it. I think the challenge for all of us is to work out what we do about that. Do we just believe the lies? Do we listen to the sound bites and send the horrible messages out? Or is there another way? Is there some other way that we can make a creative protest today? And I love the balloon, and I love lots of the stuff that's going on. But I think there's an alternative. I think there's a creative thing we can do, which any one of us can do, whether we're at home or at work or on holiday right now. And that is to sit down with someone we disagree with, sit down with a stranger, sit down with somebody who's your neighbour who's got a different view on life to you.
Is it views that need to be addressed or actual differences? So when we talk about the Gammon Army, or the American equivalent of the Gammon Army, who are tweeting furiously about no-go zones and calls to prayer being so loud in London that you can't hear Big Ben anymore, Sharia patrols, I mean, astonishing lies, astonishing weapons-grade propaganda that is sweeping the globe at the behest of Donald Trump and his far-right supporters. Surely what those people need to do is visit is to go for a stroll through the parts of London they've been told they wouldn't be allowed to stroll through.
This isn't the way to do that, James. Not to mock them and not to make them feel small, but actually to sit down with them, have a coffee, have a meal with them.
Well, then you've missed the point about them loving the lies. They prefer the lies. They want to believe them. So the only way you can prove to them that the lies are absolutely lies is sadly to rub their noses in it.
But you could do that, and they still wouldn't believe you. The only way you can get through to a person is face to face. And you're the best at this, James. You sit down with people you disagree with, you listen to them, you have an hour-long podcast, which I love, and the thing with Simon Thomas was the best radio I've heard this year. But you know how to do that. You listen to somebody, and that's what we need to do. And whether it's your racist neighbour, whether it's the people with different sexuality down the street, whether it's a person at work who is totally different to you, unless you sit down with them, have a meal, have a coffee, whatever it takes, they're not going to feel listened to, and they're not going to change their views. And that's what we've got to do. So I've got a little campaign called Welcome Strangers, which I'm pushing today, telling people to sit down.
I love you, Nick. I love you. And 6 months ago, or certainly a year ago, I would have agreed with you, but we're not seeing that. Well, what we're seeing is people, this is why the first call today is the one that's going to stay with me. People like the lies. Because it makes them think that Trump is strong enough to break the system that has led them to the unhappy place they inhabit now. So by meeting people, they're not going to become less unhappy. They like the lies.
I'm not as cynical as you.
I know you're not yet. It's even worse than when Femi was here the other day. He sent me a message afterwards saying I shall try hard to stop thinking the good of people. One of the abiding themes of the book that I finished this week is actually about the difference between people who see the best and people who see the worst. And I'm not quite perhaps as cynical as I portray, but you're right, no one's done this more than I have over the last couple of years. And for all the emails and the lovely messages I get from people saying thank you for helping me see the light, I get furious, screaming, spit-fleckled abuse from people who hate the fact that I've helped them see the light, because they hate the light. They love the dark. They want to stay in the dark. Ian's in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
I'll try and keep it concise. Brexit and the election of Donald Trump are they're like a huge Venn diagram with a hell of a lot of overlap.
Yes.
And, the 2016 vote, the referendum, it represented a moment of vindication for Donald Trump.
Yes, I think they described it as a petri dish for Trump, didn't they? Brexit being a petri dish where the bacteria was nurtured and grown.
And this is why I think he's worried. It's not the orange balloon. It's the fact that Brexit is wobbling, and because Brexit is wobbling in Britain, he's worried the same thing might happen perhaps in the US, where people have also been sold the unworkable. And if it doesn't work in Britain, there's also a chance it won't work in the US, which is why he's calling Brexit. He's saying that Britain is in turmoil. He's talking up Boris Johnson, and he's trying to undermine Theresa May in front of her face.
But he doesn't care, does he? About all he needs is another front page, another crisis, another spectacle. It's everything is about doubling down, staying at the front of the news agenda. I think that's all he cares about. If he thought he could stay at the top of the news agenda by saying Britain should call off Brexit, he probably would. Well, maybe his billionaire backers wouldn't let him. Certainly Murdoch wouldn't have given him the front of today's Sun, would he?
But it works both ways, because people like Jacob Rees-Mogg will praise Donald Trump whilst attacking Barack Obama.
Now, why would that be? How can that be? Because, either they both... I think Donald Trump has every right to comment on Brexit and the European Union, as long as I retain the right to point out which bits of what he says are lies and demonstrable untruths. And it would have been absurd not to listen to the President of America and his thoughts on the brink of the biggest political decision we'll take for a generation. How can Jacob Rees-Mogg think that one of them is allowed to, should be allowed to, and one of them shouldn't? Well, one of them is splendidly arrogant and one of them is to be welcomed.
Well, this is a Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, that addressed the Traditional Britain group, but of course...
by accident.
Yeah, he didn't know what they...
He ended up at a dinner for massive racists by accident.
Yeah, but we'll let that one slide for a minute. This is a situation where Trump, Brexit, Trump are both... Well, I was going to say something a bit rude then, but they are the same,
the same cheeks of the same backside.
Of the same rump.
Yes.
And
the Trump rump.
This is... well, I wouldn't fancy...
Let's leave it. Stop it now. Thank God for the nappy.
But you know, they are both linked. And what I say is, you can call people liars or fools or whatever for believing in the lies, but I've got to the point where I say, you know what, you are responsible for this now.
Yeah, but these are the distinctions that are so hard to draw, and I mean, I haven't got a clue where to draw them. The difference between the liar and the lied to, the difference between the mark and the mug, the conner and the conned and the con man. I mean, it's almost impossible to do, and that's why we end up today addressing the question of why people still deny the evidence of their own eyes, despite. I mean, you can literally. I mean, we're back to the emperor's new clothes again, aren't we?
Well, I say, you know, I always say to these people now, I've reached the point where Donald Trump, and the same thing with Brexit, Donald Trump is your dog. He's your dangerous dog. And, you know, now he's biting small children and attacking other dogs. you get to the point where you stop blaming the dog and you look at the owner and you say, he is your responsibility. And it is down to you. You are supporting him. You are voting for him, and it is down to you. What are you going to do about it? And if you do nothing about it, then I say then it's your fault.
Yes, but people are enjoying it. You know, that's the problem. When people get the message that, you know, we're going to hurt immigrants, we're going to hurt Muslims, we're putting babies on trial. You hear people who you thought you knew defending it, coming out and saying, yeah, well, you know, they shouldn't have done this and they shouldn't have done. It's a baby on its own in a courtroom in America. I would have, even a week ago, I would have sworn blind nobody would be cool with that. Everybody, absolutely everybody would say, whoa, look, we might disagree about immigration, legal and illegal immigration, but this just can't be allowed to happen in the civilized world. And that's the point as well that I think, again, is it deliberately that they miss this? When they say, oh, you could demonstrate against Donald Trump if you haven't demonstrated against Robert Mugabe and the King of Saudi Arabia. And you sort of say, but we cast ourselves as being on the civilized side of the world. We're the ones that look down our noses at medieval barbarism in Saudi Arabia, and we think that Robert Mugabe is an unreconstructed thug. Now, if for economic reasons the government decides that they have to break bread with these people, then I think it's disgusting and regrettable, and I wish it didn't happen. But it's not like my cousin is doing it. Do you know what I mean? America is our closest ally. The idea that you should have the same reaction to an American president being a disgusting, vile despot as you would to a Saudi Arabian royal being a disgusting, vile despot, the weapons-grade ignorance it takes to sustain that position is... That's the point at which I really do wonder what the hell is going on.
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, or you take the other point of view, which is deflection, and then you say, well, why didn't people complain about Barack Obama and some of the things he did, or to talk about Donald Trump's sexual misdemeanors.
Well, then we're back to the strongman thing, aren't we? We're back to the idea that if my strongman, my silverback gorilla, he can do whatever he wants because the rules aren't for him, and that's why he's going to make my life better and build a wall and down with Mexicans and down with Muslims and immigration. It works, apparently. This is why Hugh Grant is trending and why I wasn't being anywhere near as clever as I thought I was when I suggested to Theo Usherwood that what Theresa May needed to do was make like Hugh Grant at the end of Love Actually. Ed Miliband had a go. Did you see that this morning on Twitter? Ed Miliband had a go at suggesting the things that Theresa May should say. I'll share that with you shortly. My next two calls, oddly, are from the east and the west coast of America, so we'll get to them as quickly as possible. But here is a suggestion from the pen of Richard Curtis of how perhaps the British Prime Minister should respond to, shall we say, undesirables in the White House.
Mr. President, has it been a good visit?
Very satisfactory indeed. We got what we came for, and our special relationship is still very special.
Prime Minister?
I love that word, relationship. It covers all manner of sins, doesn't it? I fear that this has become a bad relationship. A relationship based on the president taking exactly what he wants and casually ignoring all those things that really matter to Britain. We may be a small country, but we're a great one too. Country of Shakespeare, Churchill, the Beatles, Sean Connery, Harry Potter, David Beckham's right foot, David Beckham's left foot, come to that. And a friend who bullies us is no longer a friend. And since bullies only respond to strength, from now onward, I will be prepared to be much stronger. And the President should be prepared for that.
Hugh Grant's had quite a flipping rehabilitation in the last couple of years, hasn't he? I'd forgotten about that. But also then, of course, his performance as Jeremy Thorpe was pretty special. And here's Ed Miliband, his suggestion of what to... Remember how close we were to him being Prime Minister. Thank God everyone heeded David Cameron's advice when he said, if you vote for David Miliband, it'll be a vote for chaos and confusion. A vote for me, David Cameron, will be a vote for stability and consistency. Pie-faced clown. Ed Miliband suggested... press conference words. He and I do disagree on some things. His tearing of babies from their parents, his racist attacks on the London mayor, his lies, his admiration for dictators, and I tend to think his comb-over is an absurdity. Ed Miliband, dear, what might have been. Ollie's in New York City. Ollie, what's going on?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
So I have a theory as to, well, it's not really a theory, but some reasons why we believe lies.
Yes.
As humans. So generally, when we're told something or experience something, we accept the statements or experiences to be true. And this is essentially the default state that we find ourselves in. Like you open your eyes in the morning, you look out the window, you see the sun and the sky and the trees. All of that is true. And this is why dreams mess with us, because they're not true.
Yes.
And we kind of feel like we've been lied to. So when we see and hear new information, we initially accept that's true. And then we challenge that information based on further information and prior knowledge. For example...
We choose to challenge it.
We choose to challenge it.
Yes.
So we choose to challenge it based on prior knowledge, prior experience or knowledge, or further information that we find out. For example, in the night you hear a sound. Now, is that the creaky door, or is that somebody burgling your house? If you have a creaky door, it's probably the creaky door, not somebody burgling your house. And the reason that we do this is because if we spent all day believing everything to be false, we would never get anything done.
True.
We would spend all day just thinking
So our
about
default position is trust.
Correct.
Right.
And so once we challenge a lie and discover it to be false, generally we take offense and we lay blame at the liar. The problem is if we want to believe the lie is true, and if the willingness to believe that the lie is true outweighs the feelings of mistrust, that's when we continue to believe that the lie is true, even when someone says, demonstrably, the lie is false. It's kind of the reason why, or one of the reasons why victims of domestic violence stay in relationships, because they want to believe that what they're being told is true, even when they know that it's false.
Yes, and that he will change, and that he does love me.
Yes. So in Trump's case,
But then Trump supporters will not feel like abuse victims. Abuse victims do feel... I mean, I guess actually, no, I'm making your point for you.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the tenets.
But the abuse isn't being visited upon them yet. They might be, poorer or lose their jobs or something like that, but they're not going to be victims of immigration courts. They're not going to have a wall built around there. Did you see?
No,
so
true,
it's not quite the same.
That depends upon the lies that they've been sold. Like if the lie that you were sold was that I'm going to bring your coal job back.
Yes.
And then you find out that actually that's not going to happen. You are the one that's now in the position of mistrust, but it's easier to believe that the person that told you the lie is still that's telling you the lie is telling the truth than it is to admit that you were wrong.
Yeah, and that's a really, really hard thing to do. I think we all understand that, but it's just, I guess we all have an idea of how much evidence we would need to admit that we were wrong, and we can't quite believe how much evidence there is accrued now, but people still refusing to admit they were wrong. For me, that would apply to Trump and Brexit, but,
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think the tenet of the reasons why people believe Trump and the reasons that people believe that Brexit is still going to be okay come from the same core.
Right, I think it's why Trump said the word immigration 6 or 7 times yesterday in a press conference about NATO that had absolutely nothing to do with immigration, because he knows it works in the same way that despicable poster that was unveiled shortly before Joe Cox was murdered by a white supremacist works. He spooked the hell out of people by telling them that there's there's monsters over the next hill. Speaking of, Ollie, thank you, mate. I'm going from New York to LA, actually, which is fairly opposite. But before we do that, I've got another world exclusive from Boris Johnson. I know you'll be aware this morning that Donald Trump has suggested, presumably because Rupert Murdoch put the words in his mouth, that Boris Johnson would make an excellent Prime Minister. I've now got a world exclusive, a response live from Boris Johnson.
I think Donald Trump is clearly out of his mind. If you think that's a sensible way to proceed, you can't ban people going to the United States in that way, or indeed to any country. And what he's doing is playing the game of the terrorists and those who seek to divide us. That is exactly the kind of reaction they hope to produce. And I have to say, when Donald Trump says that there are parts of London that are no-go areas, I think he's betraying a quite stupefying ignorance that makes him, frankly, unfit to hold the office of president.
Oh. I certainly wasn't expecting that. Boris Johnson there proving that even a stopped clock can be right twice a day. Anthony is in Los Angeles. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Yeah,
nice
real
to hear
quick,
an American accent.
Yeah, you can tell, right? Just want to be quick on the Trump lies. I'm one of the rare Trump fans that is not a racist, according to you. But just want to be quick, like, you mentioned Trump's lies, and sure, I get it. Like, he hasn't been perfect when it comes to his facts.
He's lied over 3,000 times in 400 days.
I get it, and I totally get it. But at the same time, it's not like he's out of the ballpark here. I mean, his lies are usually pointed to some sense of truth, which is very hard nowadays. And
so when he lied about Ronald Reagan winning Wisconsin, what sense?
No, let me bring that up real quick.
What sense of truth did that point to?
So you were like, yeah, great example, because you were like, what? Oh, wait, okay. What was his lie that he won Wisconsin and Ronald Reagan didn't?
Yeah, Reagan won it twice.
Yeah, he won it twice. But then people, okay, hear Trump say that. Well, we're looking it up and we're going, you know what? Okay, Reagan won it, but it's been about a decade since Wisconsin has ever won by a Republican state. So, in a sense, that's pointed to a truth. Trump's
no. There's no truth there at all.
His whole point there was being like, we haven't won Wisconsin in about a decade.
No, his whole point was that Ronald Reagan didn't win it.
No, his whole point there
Hey,
was
listen
saying
to yourself.
That we haven't won Wisconsin.
He said Ronald Reagan didn't win Wisconsin. We just discovered I did. How is that relevant to what happened 10 years ago? Ronald Reagan was dead?
No. Yeah, he said Ronald Reagan...
Okay, here's the other one. I don't think we're going to agree on this. You think that when he said Ronald Reagan didn't win Wisconsin, what he really meant was something completely different. When he said he predicted Brexit, cutting the ribbon at Turnberry, and we have photographs of him, which is when he said Brexit will happen, and he said it was the day before Brexit. We have photographs of him at Turnberry cutting the ribbon, and it was the day after Brexit. What was the truth that pointed to?
He was the whole campaign. His whole campaign.
No, specific question. Specific question.
Okay, so exactly. This is my point. This is exactly my point here. His whole focus was on his whole rally was saying, you know, Brexit's going to happen. He said this.
That was afterwards. That was after Brexit happened. So I'll run it by you again.
But then
I said, these are his words. I was cutting a ribbon for the opening of Turnberry the day before the Brexit vote. I said, Brexit will happen. The vote is going to go positive. Now, he did that. He cut that ribbon the day after the Brexit vote. So what was the truth he was pointing at there?
Okay. So we're doing the day after, like this...
No, I should make this clear. I'm sure you understand, but the vote had already been reported. We knew what the vote was.
Let's turn the table, James.
No, let's not. Let's answer my question about what truth. What truth was that pointing at?
All right, I'm an American, like you said, so my terms on British politics are a bit vague here.
No, but you know the difference between Monday and Tuesday.
But let me just bring up a point here.
No, tell me what truth that was pointing at.
Let me talk on this.
No, I won't, because you've made some excellent points, and I'm keen to examine them. So you said when he tells lies, he's pointing to truths. So when he lied about Ronald Reagan not having won Wisconsin, he was pointing to something completely different. When he lied about predicting Brexit,
has been won in about 10 years.
When he was, yes, I know, I understand the point that you made, but it's completely different from claiming that Ronald Reagan never won Wisconsin. When he lied about predicting Brexit, what truth was he pointing to then?
But throughout his whole rallies, he was saying Brexit's going to happen. Like, throughout his whole entire rallies, that whole campaign, he was literally claiming that.
The campaign didn't really start until after Brexit had been completed. I just want you to tell me what truth he was
flying out to UK and being
Anthony, this doesn't get any less embarrassing for you the more you talk over me. When he lied about predicting Brexit, what truth was he pointing to?
He was pointing to his general prediction that there's a change coming on in the global.
So why would he lie then about doing it when he was cutting a ribbon?
Lying.
He's not lying.
Was there.
Okay, well then we've reached the end of our little rainbow. He's not lying when he says that I was cutting a ribbon for the opening of Turnberry the day before the Brexit vote. I said Brexit will happen. He didn't cut the ribbon at Turnberry until the day after the Brexit vote, but for Anthony in Los Angeles, he's not lying. And Anthony certainly doesn't like Donald Trump for other more sinister reasons. Amazing that, actually, and I'm sure Anthony, who just rang us from Los Angeles, is a lovely bloke, but to appear on, albeit national British radio, so presumably his friends and colleagues won't have heard, and to be shown a lie and then to say it's not a lie. I found that absolutely fascinating, and anyone even vaguely familiar with 1984, of course, will know how accurately Orwell predicted Anthony in Los Angeles. The truth is a lie, and the lie is the truth. Freedom is strength. No, freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. And war, of course, is peace. Here is a lie. It's not a lie. It points to a truth. What truth? Completely different truth from what actually came out of his mouth. Whoa. Time now to cross live to Portland Square. Portland Place or Portland Square? Portland Place, where LBC's Mike Hughes is keeping an eye on one of the protests that is due to occur today against the American President Donald Trump. Mike, what's going on?
Well, James, we have just set off from Portland Place within the last few seconds, and as you can probably hear, it is an absolutely rapturous atmosphere here. I don't think there's a single person here that doesn't have a placard of some sort. Banners all over the place. I mean, there are messages, dump Trump, march like a girl. I must say this is the women's march that has just set off now. The Stop Trump march is due to take place at around about 2 o'clock this afternoon. That will also set off from Portland Place. I just want to bring in Emma here, who's marching with the many thousands here. Emma, afternoon to you. You're live on LBC. Please don't swear. Just explain why you've decided to come out today.
Because I think it's important to show the president that love trumps hate, and everyone marching here today is marching in support and celebration of the people who aren't able to, or who Trump doesn't give a voice to.
You, like almost everyone here, has a placard of some sort. Just explain what your message says.
My placard has lyrics from Beyonce because I think that she has the right thing to say in almost every situation.
Very profound. In your opinion, how do you feel the events of the last 24 hours have taken place since Mr. Trump set foot on UK soil, his relationship with Theresa May, the remarkable events that we've seen at Blenheim Palace last night? How do you feel the UK's relationship is with the United States, and can you see it being maintained?
The UK's relationship with the United States has always and will always. It's the UK's relationship with President Trump that I think is in question.
Do you feel that this very much is an anti-Trump march as opposed to an anti-America march?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're marching for and with our American brothers and sisters, not against them.
Emma, absolute pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, James, as I mentioned, this is one of many protests that are taking place today. We will set off here from Portland Place. We're now going to make our way down.
Wow. Mike, your phone line went down. Either that or you just turned into Kraftwerk. Good grief. 12:38 is the time. We'll be hearing more from Mike Hughes through the course of the afternoon, not least because, as you heard, that's only one of them. They're like buses, aren't they, these anti-Trump marches? You wait years, and then two come along at once. Poor old Queen. I'd have to say, it's not often I find myself feeling sorry for one of the richest women on the planet, but imagine having to actually have tea with this character today. And my understanding of it, 2 calls today, and we've taken loads. They've all been exceptional, actually, as is often the case at the moment. But the one from Cork and the one from Los Angeles together almost solve the riddle. Not in a reassuring or an uplifting way, but the psychology academic in Cork explaining that the lies actually empower the followers. They like the fact that he can lie and get away with it because it adds to the perception of strength, and that's your forelock tugging, cap doffing deference that I just don't get. It's just the opposite of how I was raised. Believe that I'm as good as anyone, and so are you. And then Anthony in Los Angeles ringing in to tell us that when he actually tells when he lies through his teeth, he's actually telling the truth. Somewhere between those two positions, everything makes sense. Stephen's in Leeds. Stephen, what would you like to say?
I agree with exactly what you've just said in your last piece. When it comes to Trump, it's very Orwellian. Freedom is,
slavery.
Freedom is not strength. You read 1984 and you look at the rhetoric, and it's history repeating itself. And I think some of your callers have highlighted it as well. The fact that you said on your show yesterday, 3,000 times is lied. On record.
Yeah, counted and listed. I think it's the New York Times.
Just keep the counter going up.
They do. It's an ongoing thing. I've had to leave a gap in my book for when it actually goes to publication date, because we'll put it in on that day, because it'll have gone up by 1,000 by the time they get it to the printers.
You'll get a sequel out of it, mate.
God forbid it. It's like pulling teeth getting the first one out.
The fact is, I mean, he's talking about GDP on NATO. He's talking about when he's in Brussels yesterday, he's talking about how they've agreed, and he's made the agreement where it was the Obama administration that had already put that in place.
North Korea.
North Korea,
Well, maybe the guy in LA gave us actually an unintentional, because no, I just had it there nearly. Just something came into view, and I just about to reach for it to think I could grasp onto something substantive, and then it floated away again. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Stephen.
Well, it's the point that you mentioned, the summit with Kim Jong-un and the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. They've increased it by 15% in the last 3 months. But
fake news. Fake news.
Fake news. Yep. But the fact is full of BS, and everybody should be aware of it. But
it points to it points to an element of truth. His BS points to an element of truth. He did actually go to North Korea. No, he didn't. He went to Singapore.
The BS does.
Yeah.
The BS does.
Well, that's what we just heard.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is, what he's got under his electoral belt is people that I think. I don't want to be. I think they're uneducated.
Well, they're not. No, that's a big mistake. Big mistake. Also, it ties into that thing that the Brexit toffs do as well, when they try and claim that the ordinary working class people are the reason for the xenophobia and the racism. This doesn't come from uneducated people. This comes from wealthy, educated people using their wealth and education to con, manipulate and gull everybody else. It's not a lack of education that leads you to hatred and racism. It is the careful manipulations of rich, educated people that leads you to hatred and racism. Look at Donald Trump talking about Sadiq Khan and terrorism anyway, I mean, in a million years he wouldn't suggest that Andy Burnham was responsible for the terror attack on the Manchester Arena. Now, why can that be?
What you're talking about there is, when you talk about wealthy and educated, you're talking about manipulation in the sense of that people want to gain power or retain power or
money,
gain wealth. There is an element of that. And there's lobbying and there's big business. But I think with Trump, when he talks about Brexit and he talks about Theresa May saying that she's not doing the right thing, I actually agree with him. I voted Brexit, and I agree with him. But you could see his press officers yesterday absolutely reeling with the fact that he's coming off the cuff again. I understand what he's saying in the sense.
But you also understand. You also understand that when he said he told her what she should do, he was lying through his teeth again.
Of course he was. And I loved your commentary yesterday on his Brussels speech.
It has gone down rather well. We might make a habit of it, but it only works if it's live. It doesn't work if I prepare it. It's got to be off the cuff. It's not. It's heavy lifting that, Stephen. 3 hours a day, mate. It's not. Honestly, those coal miners, they don't know they're born. This is where the real hard work is done. And we'll have an argument about Brexit. We'll have an argument about Brexit on another day, all right?
All right, mate.
All right, mate. 12:45. Michael Fabricant, the MP who tweeted that ridiculous and profoundly offensive image of Sadiq Khan and a pig. Obviously, the place of the pig in the Islamic faith is the only relevant element of that tweet. You know, you can take the mickey out of people as much as you want, but incitement to religious hatred or incitement to racial hatred are two very different things. And I found myself in the astonishing position earlier of having to describe the pig to you while asking Sadiq Khan about it, having to describe the tweet that Michael Fabricant had shared. Involving me issuing a phrase that I don't imagine I'll say on any other day in my broadcasting career. It features you being mounted by a pig, was the rather unfortunate turn of phrase I was forced to employ. Michael Fabricant has issued his apology. I'd like to read it to you in full. I knew he would, by the way, as soon as we got it out and up and running with the mayor on the record. I accidentally tweeted a vile picture which had been sent to me by someone I knew in connection with Her Majesty's Customs and Brexit. I thought it was from someone with good judgment. Because I was distracted in a meeting and saw it on a tiny iPhone screen, I didn't spot what it really was. When I saw the picture, I thought it was just a funny cartoon of a flying pig doing something to the baby Trump blimp. This followed on from my remarks on TV about the hypocrisy of the anti-Trump demos and the ridiculous blimp. Instead, it was something quite different and very nasty. Once I realised what it was, I deleted it, all within a couple of minutes or so. But that was too late. I find it all particularly galling, as everyone knows I am a socially liberal conservative. I would never deliberately put up a racist or Islamophobic tweet to offend people. It's not my style, nor do I think that way. I really apologise to people I offended by my lack of attention to that picture. I will apologise to Sadiq too, which I think is fair enough. We've all accidentally tweeted. I'm not being glib or facetious. It can happen. You can retweet stuff. You can press like or press retweet when you didn't mean to. So there you have it from Michael Fabricant. Unless he didn't, I haven't actually seen the original tweet. I've only shared the description of the picture. He didn't write anything on it, did he? Because if he did, then obviously he's gone peak Anthony in Los Angeles on his attempt to portray a lie as the truth. Because if he wrote something, if he wrote a comment on it, then you'd have a slight, but he won't have done, I'm sure. So there it is, Michael Fabricant responding to that criticism and condemnation. The problem is that Channel 4 News I don't know whether they were interviewing him about this or something else, but they've been filming him in his office, and someone at Channel 4 News has just spotted what appears to be an apartheid-era flag on his mantelpiece. Socially liberal conservative. Interesting. I'm looking at the original tweet now. I still can't tell whether or not someone wrote, well, what can I say, on it. But who will that be? Well, that could have been the thing he retweeted, couldn't it? Or does that... So he wrote on it himself. He appears to have written on it himself, well, what can I say, while not having time to notice what was actually in the picture. There's only really one response to that, Michael. Well, what can I say? 12:51 is the time. Andrew's been waiting longer. I'll be with you imminently, Loki. Andrew's in Kingston upon Hull first. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to say that Donald Trump he sort of gets into the psyche that is in most white people. I'm a white man. I've seen racist stuff all my life, basically from the 70s, where I come from. We don't have many dark people, but the fact is it doesn't stop racism and the demonisation of it. And he just says things that lots of these, like Fabricant, I mean, he's a disingenuous... Steady on, because
that's a developing story. And no, that's all right, you can call him disingenuous.
People like Boris Johnson, then, who talks about pickaninnies and goes back to 18th century British... You know, I'm a working class, stupid lorry driver, but I've looked and seen racists all my life, and I know when they are. They only have to open their mouth. Their intonations, I can tell them a mile off. I have been able to for years. I used to get into fights in the 70s. I used to wear a black glove. Do you remember the black glove thing at the Olympics?
Yes.
The Americans wore a black glove, didn't they? I got into a fight once. I used to wear that religiously, and so...
But how do you tell... I'm going to interrupt you, because we're going to run out of time and I want to squeeze in someone else. But how do you tell the difference? Because you have used the word disenfranchised, I think. That you're not describing disenfranchised now. Jacob Rees-Mogg's not disenfranchised. Boris Johnson... You can't get much more franchised. So how do you tell the difference between the people who've got... Hang on, let me get the question out. Between the genuinely prejudiced, as it were, and those who've swallowed the lie that their own suffering is somehow the fault of foreigners?
The thing is that many people do not realise the manipulation that goes on in this country. You mentioned about the Sun the other day. I haven't read a newspaper since the 70s because I realise just how badly we are manipulated in this country. The fact is that
where'd you get your news from?
The Nazis.
Where'd you get your news from?
I look at everything, James.
Yes.
I don't do anything. I'm a cripple. I stay at home, and for years and years, I've always been political. I used to be a Labour Party. I used to be a union rep.
Yeah, TGWU, was it?
So, and I realised how corrupt this place is after 3 terms of Margaret Thatcher winning. And I've never voted since because I realised that unless they change the actual voting system, we live in a 2-party state. And we have done all my life.
Well, listen.
The only way that the Labour Party wins is if they go so far right that it disenfranchises the people that I know and love.
I hear you, and I will talk again. I'm moving on only because of the time available. Can I ask you one last question? And if you could answer it briefly, I'd be grateful. What do you think of Jeremy Corbyn?
I actually voted for the first term, and I voted for Corbyn. You know why I voted for him?
No, of course I don't.
You know why I voted for him?
Go on.
Because he was the first Labour Party a Labour man that's actually stood up and actually looked about the principles of what the Labour Party actually means.
I thought you might say that, and I almost hoped you might, because I mean, though there's still a long way for me to go. It's nice to hear that you believe there is actually some sincerity and some honesty on that side of the House of Commons at the moment. Andrew, we'll talk again. Thank you for getting in touch. 12:55 is the time. Have we conclusively established that Michael Fabricant is claiming to have accidentally tweeted a picture that he added a comment to? Because that is, I mean, I guess we need Anthony in Los Angeles to explain to us why that's not bad, don't we? Loki's in Latimer Road, our old manor. Loki, what would you like to say?
Hi, how you doing, James? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I've only got a couple of minutes left, though, so I don't want to squeeze you.
No problem at all. So what I'd like to say, in terms of Trump, they say the best place to hide a lie is between 2 truths. And what we look at on the back of NAFTA, which basically, left 3.7 million Americans out of jobs, and it turned the United States from a productive power to a consumptive power. And at that time, what that led to, and this is a kind of inevitability of neoliberalism, is it leads people to start to connect their plight with people outside their borders. But what they were really adept at doing in the Trump campaign was having a vertical solidarity between themselves and between the people affected by these policies and transferring the grievances in the direction...
How? I mean, you're using quite a lot of technical terms. I'm all right. I'm keeping up. But vertical solidarity suggesting the fostering of fellow feeling between haves and have-nots and making the have-nots feel that the haves have got the answer to their problem while simultaneously being the problem. So how did they do that?
Not just that, Donald Trump is the most grotesque form of corporate irresponsibility.
Yes.
What he is a neoliberal completely and totally. When you look at some of the policies he's pushing towards, they are the privatization of water in the United States, which will be in the interest of Suez, which is a French company. When you look at some of his policies whereby he is deregulating the fossil fuel industry, according to the IMF, the United States government pays £700 billion per year in subsidies to the fossil fuel companies. So what we're seeing is he is corporatism completely, but he's trying to paint himself and wrap himself in the clothes of real grievances with the failed economic project.
So you need a real grievance in order to sell the wrong solution to the real grievance. And the real grievance is caused by precisely the sort of corporate interest that he represents. So he's persuading people to blame others, Mexicans, migrants, call them what you will, for problems created by him and his ilk.
Yeah, by the global 1%. And that's the point. When you look at Steve Bannon and what he was saying after he left the White House, he said, I said when Bernie Sanders failed, that all of Bernie Sanders' voters would come and vote for us. Why is it that Steve Bannon is saying that, and why does he feel okay saying that? Because the point is that Sheldon Wallen had an amazing theory called inverted totalitarianism. And what he argued was that traditional totalitarianism was when the government controls all of the levers, all of the interest outside of its immediate space. However, inverted totalitarianism is when the monopolizing companies actually control the real levers of power in the government. So we have certain red lines we can't vote on. We can't vote against the interests of the banking system. We can't vote against the interests of the arms companies. We can't vote against the interests that we see in many ways as hurting people throughout the world. So what Trump was able to do was to tap into that energy and depict himself as the ultimate anti-hero. When Ted Cruz was up against him, he said Ted Cruz is a slave of Goldman Sachs. What happened when Trump got in? He brought in Steve Bannon of Goldman Sachs.
And to Stephen Mnuchin and other Goldman Sachs people. But by then it doesn't matter because the lie has kind of been slotted between the truths. Loki, mate, I warned you we were going to run out of time. A few people have spotted who you are, by the way.
Okay, no problem.
Well, I'm going to have to tell them now that you are a well-known artiste.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Although if you can get some of that into your next track, I'll be deeply impressed.